This is a CBC News special presentation.
You are looking live at Rideau Hall in the nation's capital, where today Mark Carney will be sworn in as Canada's next Prime Minister. Mark Carney has never held elected office, never won a seat, but on Sunday he won an overwhelming victory in the Liberal leadership race.
The next Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney.
A short contest called to replace Justin Trudeau, who, facing pressure from within his party and flagging public support, announced in January he was stepping down.
I cannot be the one to carry the Liberal standard into the next election.
Carney will now take over and lead the Liberals into that election, a race that could kick off in a matter of days.
We are going to have a carbon tax election.
We're ready to go to an election.
We're ready. Let's go.
Carney is choosing a team to lead Canada through the coming weeks, appointing fewer ministers, a slimmed-down wartime cabinet for a critical time in Canada's history.
We know this is a crucial time for our country. We're united to serve Canadians.
The threat from south of the border, the one challenge that will hang over his every decision.
I'm not stopping the tariffs. Without us, Canada can't make it. I say Canada should be our 51st state.
Today, we see who Mark Carney wants to help him take on those threats and his priorities heading into the next election as he becomes Canada's 24th Prime Minister. Hello there, I'm Rosemary Barton, joining you, hoping you're joining us for special coverage of this historic day. Justin Trudeau has now visited the Governor-General to resign formally as Prime Minister and recommend to her that she ask Mark Carney to form government and a new ministry. Mark Carney will be arriving at Rideau Hall shortly, followed by the ministers that he has appointed to his cabinet, because Justin Trudeau's cabinet, when he resigns, also no longer exists. Host of Power and Politics, David Cochrane, is, of course, by my side to discuss a little bit about this cabinet, who we are expecting to see. We've been talking about it for days now. It is going to be a slimmed-down cabinet, down from, it was 37, including Justin Trudeau in his last iteration. Nothing like that today, we're going to see.
No, look, if you're going to be in this cabinet, it's a streamlined, focused cabinet to meet the moment. If you got dropped from it, it's a bloodbath. We're talking about 20 ministers, give or take, down from the 36. And pretty much all of the big jobs are changing, with the exception of the Foreign Affairs Ministry, where we know that Mélanie Joly is staying in that job and adding the roles of international development to that position. But the Finance Ministry job is changing. Dominic LeBlanc is leaving that job. He's been dealing with that since December 16th, when Chrystia Freeland resigned. He's been, the main point person on the Canada-U.S. conversations. He is going to move to the Trade Ministry, take on responsibility for intergovernmental affairs as well, and also has special focus for the Canada-U.S. relationship. François-Philippe Champagne, who was in Washington yesterday in his old job as the Innovation Minister, is going to be the new Finance Minister. A job he has wanted, I would suspect, Rosie, for most of his political career, if not all of his political career, and one that he does have a skill set well suited for. And, the working on a budget, which we may never see, and working on, managing the domestic economy while also dealing with the challenges from Donald Trump in the United States, that's a lot for one person. So LeBlanc takes the lead on that, and trade, and Champagne moves there. Other nuggets, we're not going to have a deputy prime minister in this cabinet, is what I'm told. We do not know where Anita Anand is going, though that innovation, science, and economic development industry job that Champagne left is just sitting there, waiting to be plucked. Stephen Guilbeault leaves environment. He's taking on a new sort of super ministry that includes heritage and also responsibility for biodiversity, parks, oceans, that sort of thing. And he also moves into the role, the critically important political role as the Quebec lieutenant for Mark Carney. A lot of Quebecers you'll see moving up in this portfolio or in this cabinet, in terms of prominence. Though Jean-Yves Duclos is out, Joël Lightbound is not in, so no representation for the Quebec City area, which is an area where the Conservatives, as Fred Delory will tell us later in the show, hope to make gains. So some interesting choices here. Mark Carney has given Liberals hope up until now. The polls show that. He's started disappointing people this week as they do not get into cabinet and lose their jobs entirely. We'll see exactly what the final formation of it is within the hour.
Okay, thank you. David will be here, of course, by my side, as he does, doing what he does so well. This is Mark Carney's really first test. It's his first attempt to send a message to Canadians about the kind of prime minister he will be. We also know that he is doing his first trip outside of this country to Europe in the coming days, also sending a strong message with that, and we'll talk about what that means. But we will be keeping our eye for now on the arrivals at Rideau Hall Hall, of course. First person to arrive, we are told, will be the new Prime Minister. The CBC's Ashley Burke is there for us. Ashley, what are you hearing there on the ground?
Well, the last time I was here for a swearing in was in December, and I'm just thinking about how different this is going to look. At that event, Justin Trudeau was nowhere to be seen. He went in at some sort of back door. Afterwards, he didn't come out. His cabinet ministers were the ones that took questions. He stayed away from the cameras completely, and today we're expecting this to look dramatically different. This is really all about Mark Carney trying to introduce himself to more Canadians, and he's got a tough job ahead of him because he has to show that he's different from the Trudeau government, that this isn't just a continuation of what we saw in the past, especially as he's facing attacks from the Conservatives that they're accusing him of being the same as Justin Trudeau. So as you talked about, we're expecting a smaller cabinet today. We're expecting also that some people will take on multiple portfolios, so they'll be potentially more powerful roles, and it will really signal what his priorities are. Sources are saying that there's going to be a laser focus on ministers taking on this trade war as well as the economy, and soon we're expecting to see not only Mark Carney walk up at some point to the right of me to head into the front of Rideau Hall, but also ministers in groups we're expecting to head inside where they'll be sworn in. Afterwards, he's expected to come out and deliver his first speech as Prime Minister, likely with all of his cabinet ministers behind him. And this will be a chance for him really to signal his priorities that are ahead and what will set him apart from the current government. Rosie?
Okay, Ashley, thank you for that. Of course, come and jump on anytime you see anyone or there's something happening down there. We'll put you up. Thank you very much for that. Mark Carney has obviously been a public figure for many decades, but lots of Canadians just starting to get to know him from his upbringing in Alberta to central banker in tough economic times, and now leader of the Liberal Party of Canada. And as of today, the Prime Minister of Canada. In case you don't know much about Mark Carney, here's a little bit of who he is.
This is no time for politics as usual.
Mark Carney pitched himself as an outsider, not a politician, but someone who would have the skills needed to meet the moment.
No, it's not the time for lifelong politicians such as Pierre Poilievre.
He was born in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, raised in Edmonton. His father, Bob, ran for the Liberals, coming in second to the Progressive Conservatives. Carney studied economics abroad, earning a bachelor's degree from Harvard University before getting his master's and PhD from Oxford. For 13 years, he worked for global investment banking firm Goldman Sachs, before holding several senior positions at the Bank of Canada and in the finance department in Ottawa.
CPP, QPP is not federal money, it is shared money for all Canadians.
In 2008, then Prime Minister Stephen Harper appointed Carney to run the Bank of Canada, the second youngest bank governor ever.
Some of the world's largest financial institutions have recorded substantial losses.
Amid the global financial crisis, Carney called for widespread reforms to the world's financial system.
Double hats now as the head of the International Financial Stability Board, so delighted you're able to join us, Mark.
Working alongside Harper Conservatives, Carney was credited for how well Canada weathered the financial storm compared to other nations. Even named as one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people in 2010, the only central banker on the list, alongside people like U.S. President Barack Obama.
Canada has shone, relatively speaking, in the world during the period of time in which Governor Carney has served as the governor of the Bank of Canada.
In 2013, Carney became the governor of the Bank of England, becoming the first ever foreigner to be named to that role. He later agreed to stay on at the helm for 2 extra years to help ease the Brexit transition. More recently, Carney worked for investment firm Brookfield Asset Management, served as the United Nations Special Envoy on Climate Action.
2/3 of carbon being priced by the end of the decade.
For years, he supported a carbon tax, only to walk away from the policy at the start of the leadership race.
Why don't I become a circus clown? I mean, it's like...
For more than a decade, Carney toyed with the idea of running for the top job of the Liberal Party.
I have gainful employment, and I intend to continue it.
In 2020, Prime Minister Trudeau tapped Carney to serve as an informal advisor on the government's pandemic recovery plan.
The next Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney.
He immediately became a front-runner in the leadership race when Trudeau resigned earlier this year. He has never held public office, but Liberals bought his pitch. Now he will have to convince Canadians. That's just a little bit of a reminder of who Mark Carney is, because for many of you, you are just learning who he is, and he is primarily our next Prime Minister, the 24th Prime Minister of this country. To talk more about this cabinet and what Mark Carney is doing today, we'll bring in David's panel, because I like to steal his panel when I'm also stealing his studio. Greg McEachern's a former Liberal ministerial advisor, Fred Delory, former Conservative campaign manager, Melanie Richer, a former communications director for the NDP, and Sherelle Evelyn is the managing editor of the Hill Times. Glad you're all here. Thanks for being here. Greg, what are you going to be watching for as the resident Liberal with us today? What is the message you think Mark Carney needs to send to the party and to the country?
David earlier spoke about managing this is the first time that Mark Carney might disappoint people, and that's the reality of governing. Sure. And I think that's, it's good sometimes just to kind of, I can't help but compare this to 2015, dramatic walk up the drive at Rideau Hall. Canadians don't want that. So we are at the subatomic level here, but Canadians right now are engaged in a way that they've not been engaged in a news story in a long time. And we see this. We can see this at hockey games. Mm-hmm. So what message are they going to take away from this? And I think if the Liberals manage the messaging well today, and it's not just messaging, it's the reality. It's a smaller cabinet. We're serious. We're getting down to business. I think a lot of Canadians right now who are anticipating taking a hit on a bunch of different fronts, whether they run a small business or their mortgage rates, we're still absorbing the impacts of inflation. And they're being told that their government is going to be run smaller and tighter. I think they will like that.
Yeah, you see there on the right of your screen, that is the front door of Rideau Hall. And Greg's right, we are not expecting this to look like a party. That's not the branding around this. This is to be a serious, small venture, a lot of consolidation of departments. And Mark Carney will come up by himself, and then we're told the rest of the ministers will follow him in. So very different from what we've seen in previous Liberal governments and even in Conservative governments, where this is usually kind of a celebration moment because you've won an election. This is a very different kind of scenario, Fred.
Yeah, well, there's obviously the whole Trump tariff issue, but there's also the fact we're going to the polls in the next 9 days. This is not a wartime cabinet, it's an election cabinet. It's how do you put forth part of your narrative of why you should be reelected. And that's what's going to be interesting to see who's in this cabinet and what regions are they from. Mm-hmm. What regions are they promoting or trying to break through? We're hearing a lot of Quebecers in there in very senior roles. The path to a Liberal majority is through Quebec right now. We're seeing Canadian nationalism is rising there, where the Quebec nationalism is falling. And that plays well for the Liberals. We've seen in the current polling we're seeing there, the Conservatives are actually ahead of the bloc. Yeah. And they're at that weird threshold where what they could end up doing is causing a lot of bloc seats to go Liberal. Yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all maps out.
Mel, how about you? What are you watching for today?
Yeah, what the message coming out of today is, to your point, we're going to an election in a few days. So what is it that you're saying to folks? Of course, we've heard a lot from Mark Carney in the last few weeks, but that was really focused on Liberal members. Now you're talking to Canadians. So what are you saying to them? I'm looking for the same thing as it relates to Quebec, particularly with a leader, a prime minister, who struggles a little bit to connect with folks in Quebec. So, the rumors of us hearing that folks from Quebec are going to take up a bigger space. How does that play out in campaign times? It will be interesting to pay attention to. And I also just can't help but point out that we were here less than 3 months ago talking about the last cabinet shuffle. So our folks...
We'll be here in 2 months' time.
I know. But as folks are paying attention today, and I do think that folks are really tuning in because they're worried, right? Yeah. So they're trying to pay attention to what's happening. Does cabinet shuffles, does who gets named make an impact on them? I think that's too soon to tell, but those are the kinds of messages and things I'm paying attention to today.
And we're talking a lot about an election. You didn't miss anything. An election has not been called, but we do expect, given what Mark Carney has said, that he will seek a mandate from Canadians, because that would be pretty critical for him, given that he doesn't have a seat himself. So we are hearing that could happen within a number of days, probably not immediately because of this Europe trip. But Sherelle, what do you think is important here in terms of what Canadians should be watching for?
Well, as Mark Carney's team has kind of said that, their focus are like three things: change, focus, and action, right? So how are these cabinet picks going to, really represent that? If the big thing right now is to put that demarcation line in and say, there was Trudeau and now there's Carney, and how do we really sell the fact that this isn't the Trudeau government, while at the same time keeping a lot of the same people who made up the Trudeau government. That's, I think, going to be a really interesting line to walk. I'm also going to be looking for, there has been this kind of backlash against anything that might be looked at like identity politics or virtue signaling and things like that. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was very big on, his gender balanced cabinet and things like that. And we're talking about provincial representation, but what about other types of representation? We already know that there's a few names like, Marcy Ian isn't running again. The fate of Ahmed Hassan, who we believe is, he's out. So there are, if you're thinking about, okay, are you actually going to have any black people in your cabinet? Those types of things could send a really interesting signal to people who are watching. There are other people available. Ariel Kayabaga was a member of his team and she endorsed him. Is he going to, find a spot for Frank Baylis? Things like that. Those could be interesting.
We're told Frank Baylis is not in either. In fact, we're also told that there's no one unelected in this cabinet except for Mark Carney, as we're all joking about before. I wonder, though, I'm talking to lots of people, whether the fact that this is, as he is, or in his team is telling people, a transitional cabinet to get them through an election and to deal with Donald Trump, whether that buys him any goodwill from people that he's going to disappoint today.
I think there's potential there. I mean, cutting the numbers down to 20, maybe that's all you need for right now. I mean, we assume the final number is 20, but it's give or take around 20. It gives you two things. Like, in addition to the disappointment of the people who are dropped to get to that number and the people who don't get in to stay at that number, if you're going to build out from there, should you win the next election, it keeps people motivated if they want to come back into cabinet, keeps them on the ticket, because losing incumbents this late in the game is a problem, but it also gives you space and something to offer star candidates you might be trying to recruit, right? Like, we talked about the offer to Jean Charest that was made. He turned it down. He doesn't want to run. I don't think he's ever going to necessarily come into this government. But Christy Clark is a name that was talked about as someone who might go into cabinet, the former Premier of British Columbia. They were talking to her right up until it was decided she wasn't going in, is what I am told. But she is going to run. She's got to find a seat in British Columbia, and where that's going to be, she would presumably go into cabinet as a former premier, should they win and hold on. So it allows you to leave space for big names with big resumes to come in and join the team, because if you want to show renewal, you're limited in what you can do with the existing set of ingredients, right? Like, you have the caucus you have, and that's not denigrating them, but to do a wholesale change, you can't do it with the people who have been there, and also, with the wave of nationalism that's out there and with the connections that have been made. So we know Dominic LeBlanc is moving from finance, but he's staying on Canada-US, because you want each conversation with Howard Lutnick to build on the one before, rather than to start completely fresh, right? And so I think that's part of the reason we saw Champagne go to Washington for this meeting, to get to know, Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, personally, start to build that relationship. So they have room to grow should they hold on and win. And that's there's nothing like the opportunity for promotion and opportunity to keep people motivated and on the team.
One of the things that Fred said there, this is an election cabinet. Sure, it definitely is, but it is also a wartime cabinet. I mean, I think it has to be both of those things, and that's why, as what David was just saying about not moving those people from their key roles when it comes to the Canada-US thing. Melanie Joly is staying where she is for obvious reasons. What do you make of how they sort of talk about those two things at once, I guess?
Yeah, let's not lose sight of the fact that Melanie Joly and Champagne, maybe some others that are Dominic, obviously, could have ran for leader and might have, pulled it off. And instead chose to focus on this at a really tough time for Canada. So I'm sure that's part of the decision as well. And they have probably picked up a decade's worth of experience of dealing with the Trump government in the last 3 months. So I think that's part of it as well. And just going back to the disappointment factor for some, as you said, a couple of months ago, we were having very different conversations here. If you're upset about losing your job today, well, guess what? A couple of weeks ago, you were definitely going to lose your job.
That's a good
point.
So,
suck it up, Buttercup. And there's bigger things at play here.
You think the complaining about promotion is less serious than worrying about extinction? Is that what you're saying? Because that's the shift.
And again, what I love about getting outside of Ottawa, so you actually see what's real. But we see it, and as I mentioned, every time you watch a hockey game. Tara Sloan, the hockey commentator, was on with Andrew Nichol a few weeks ago. And the people that complain about people that were booing the anthem, she pointed out this is a way for Canadians to send their message to the American government. So I think people ought to pay very, very close attention that that's what people are thinking, and that's what they want to kind of see from their government right now. The other thing I'd point out is that, Fred just worked on Doug Ford's campaign. Doug Ford ran for during an election and went to Washington.
Sorry, Greg, I just want to jump in. There are a couple people that have arrived. Steve McKinnon, who was the Minister of Employment and Labour, he is getting a change today, I believe. And David, jump in if you have more on that. David McGuinty also just walked in. He's Public Safety Minister. I don't think we expect him to change portfolios. He also has been pretty key in this time since the last shuffle. He has taken on the border, fentanyl. He also has developed relationships in Washington to help him with that, and is working closely with the fentanyl czar in order to deal with some of the demands of the Trump administration. Those are the first people arriving. Mark Carney, we're told, is still about 10 minutes away.
Some more there, Rosie.
Yeah, so here we have Dominic LeBlanc.
Okay, so that's Ali Assasi, Patty Haidu, Kamal Khera, and Dominic LeBlanc. We know that Dominic LeBlanc will take over Trade, Canada-U.S. Relations, and IGA. Patty Haidu, we believe, may stay in the Indigenous Services portfolio. Kamal Khera, who is a nurse, is being promoted to the Minister of Health, and Ali Assasi, I'd heard that yesterday. I remember I got a phone call from a disgruntled MP, and Ali Assasi, I'd heard, was someone who might be in line for a promotion. So that's an interesting move there. I don't know where he is necessarily going at this point in time. Notably, one of the MPs who signed the letter calling for the Prime Minister to step down. David McGuinty, we suspect, will stay in public safety, Rosie. Stephen McKinnon, who's been Minister of Labour, there's talk of him getting a supercharged sort of Employment Services and Development Canada portfolio, sort of expanding the Labour portfolio, maybe bringing back seniors as well to that. There was someone else who walked in. That was Richie Valdez. I thought that's who it was. It's hard to see on the small screen. She has been the Small Business Minister, I believe. She was one of the new appointments to Cabinet.
Here's Jonathan Wilkinson, Stephen Guilbeault. I believe that is Ariel Kayabaga. Is that her last name? Yes. And Joanne Thompson. So they're very fortuitous, very smart of you, Sherelle, to mention her. She as well was a Carney supporter. You are not going to find many people who supported someone else in the leadership race walking in these doors today, in part because he had most of the caucus support, but in part because some people who did support Freeland, Mark Holland, for instance, are not in cabinet, and he announced yesterday he wouldn't be running again. You will, however, see Chrystia Freeland. And David, we are reporting that she is getting the portfolio of transport. Now, I'm not saying it's a demotion, but that is not the same level of portfolio that she received under Justin Trudeau. But she's the only leadership candidate who's getting into cabinet. So.
Yeah, you may not say it's a demotion, but it's a demotion. I mean, she's at the cabinet table, but she's not the deputy prime minister. She's not the finance minister. She is not at the heartbeat of the government right now. Those are other ministers who are going to be in those roles. Ariel Kayabaga is an interesting choice. Southwestern Ontario, London MP. Don't know where she's going. Joanne Thompson is the one Newfoundland and Labrador MP who is still running again. And she was in cabinet as Minister of Seniors. Stephen Guilbeault is moving from environment, but keeping a lot of biodiversity, parks, oceans, we're told, and responsibilities, and also adding Canadian heritage, like a Canadian identity and culture portfolio or something. It's a super ministry, and will also be the Quebec lieutenant. I don't know if Jonathan Wilkinson stays in natural resources, Rosie, or if he maybe goes back to environment. He approaches environment from a technology and business sense, and had a good relationship with Alberta.
Yeah, okay, here we have more arrivals. I believe that's Anita Anand there, Chrystia Freeland, and Nate Erskine-Smith, who was the housing minister. I'm a little surprised to see him there because we weren't sure whether he would make this cut, but he has been friendly to Mark Carney as well. Anita Anand expected to get an economic portfolio, which is something that she has been anxious to have, I think. David, that's fair to say?
Yeah, my best bet, and this is a bet, I'm not reporting this, is that she goes into the innovation job that Minister Champagne had left. Curious to see what happens with a lot of the regional development agencies there, whether they do secretaries of state and people doing that sort of as a second tier of cabinet. They were all under Navdeep Bains. You remember the first Trudeau cabinet when he was the innovation minister, and there's some frustration in regional areas that like ACOA and Western Canada economic development being run through Brampton. So we'll see how that all shakes out there. But she's in line. She was going to retire, remember? Spend time with her family.
Yes, she was, yep.
And then everything changed in a month, and here she is at the cabinet swearing in.
When you think you might win and form government again, it's remarkable how your ideas change. Although I will say, to Anita Anand's credit, when I interviewed her a couple of weeks ago, she did point out that she's going to have a tough race in Oakville. It is not a given that she even wins her own riding. Here is Bill Blair arriving, Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor. Who's that on the left? Is that?
That's Terry Duguid.
Terry
and I think that's
Duguid.
Elizabeth Briere, based on what I can see.
Yeah,
she
I
was
think
added
you're
in
right.
the last cabinet. Terry Duguid is he's been the national campaign co-chairs in Manitoba, cabinet minister Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor from New Brunswick. Elizabeth Briere is a Quebec MP who was brought in after we saw Marie-Claude Bibeau and others leave. She was agriculture minister, I believe. And Bill Blair's in defense, which I suspect he may very well stay.
Yeah, I have that
I don't expect
feeling as well, yeah.
No, sorry, Elizabeth Briere was Minister of National Revenue. My apologies there. So she is coming back into cabinet as well.
We're just we're going to see everybody come in here, and then we'll bring in the panel for some other thoughts about who we're seeing and why we're seeing them. The person that you won't see is Karina Gould. She is the leadership candidate that is not getting into cabinet. So far, we've seen 16 ministers or would-be ministers arrive here, so probably won't see too many more, given that we expect this to be around 20 or so. Just a handful more to come, and of course, the Prime Minister as well. It's going to take some getting used to. It's been 10 years of saying one guy's name. We'll have to switch to this other guy. Had the same problem with Stephen Harper, everybody. That's what happens with transitions. Yes, as we were saying, Karina Gould, I'll bring you in here, David, not getting into cabinet. I don't even think there was a conversation about it. I do know that some of Karina Gould's very progressive policies were not a favorite of Mark Carney's. I think that's fair to say. I think she's got lots of skills and talent, but I'm not sure that that's going to happen here. Okay, here is François-Philippe Champagne, Rachel Bendayan. Is that Terry Beat?
No, that is Cody Blois.
Cody Blois,
and,
as you predicted.
Gary
yeah.
Anandasangari.
That's right.
So Cody Blois becomes a new Nova Scotia minister. I would guess that Darren Fisher, who was just still had that new minister smell, is not staying in cabinet because he was only appointed a little over a month ago. Minister Champagne, we expect to get promoted to finance. Gary Anandasangari, we have been reporting, will be the Minister of Justice and also keep Crown and Indigenous relations, an important portfolio, even when you're focused on the Canada-U.S. Cody Blois, not sure. Fisheries could be an option there, as Diane Lebetelier is out of cabinet, we know, though it did announce she is running again. And sorry, who was the fourth person who went in there?
Rachel Bendayan.
Rachel Bendayan.
Yeah.
Interesting there. The Montreal MP, Mark Miller, it's been reported is out. That certainly seems possible. So someone needs to do the immigration file. I don't know if that's a role there for Rachel Bendayan, but you are seeing a decent mix of gender balance. A lot of Quebec, a lot of Ontario so far at this point.
So we're up to 20 now here. So if we start to go over 25, I'm going to start questioning how lean and mean
the lean and mean
cabinet
cabinet.
actually is.
We haven't seen an Alberta MP, George Chahal or Randy Boissonneau. We have not seen a Prince Edward Island MP. With Lawrence McCauley not running, Sean Casey, Bobby Morrissey, and Heath MacDonald. And we've not seen anyone from the north, right? So, and we've only seen one MP from British Columbia. That would be Minister Wilkinson, because Harjit Sajjan's not running. It looks like Terry Beach is out. And so maybe that is their 20-person cabinet plus the Prime Minister gets you up to 21.
Yeah, I mean, maybe,
so that sounds like where it's going.
Yeah, I think Mark Carney would argue that he is the Alberta MP. He might also argue he's the MP from the north, given that he was born.
Sure, he doesn't have a seat in either.
Who knows? So anyway, we're up to 20 people here right now that we've seen go through the doors, and some of their jobs we know, and some of them still to be determined. Some of the people, like a Cody Blois, for instance, David, that is not only a nod to Atlantic Canada, but also about supporting him. Is that? Yeah,
he is the Atlantic Caucus chair, he was sort of in the middle of the efforts to remove the Prime Minister, not necessarily at his initiative, but advocating for the caucus. Now, how that was perceived inside the PMO, that's another question. But yeah, that's an interesting move there. He's a very ambitious guy. He's in his early 30s. He has Scott Bryson's old seat. Ali Assasi, interesting to point out, who we saw going in. He was, I think, the only Toronto MP who endorsed Mark Carney.
Interesting.
You know,
you haven't seen Melanie Joly, and that's for the simple reason that she is in the Charlevoix wrapping up the G7 foreign ministers meeting. We are told she will be sworn in later today because she technically will be out of a job or is out of a job given the Prime Minister has dissolved his ministry, but she will stay in that job and be sworn in later today. The Commissioner of the RCMP, Mike Duhem, we saw him going in through the doors there, and someone said David Johnston, is that possible? I don't know.
I think the Prime Minister of Canada right now is actually the Chief Justice Wagner.
Oh, Wagner. Richard Wagner, that's who it is.
He is the Prime Minister
right
now because Justin Trudeau has resigned.
That's right.
Mark Carney hasn't sworn in.
Right.
So it's a day of 3 Prime Ministers in what could be a year of 3 Prime Ministers, depending on the election. Or 4, if you can.
So the one person we haven't seen yet, of course, is Mark Carney, who will be making his way into that Toreto Hall himself. He doesn't live too far away. And I don't know if he's going to move into the new place, Rideau Cottage or not. Those are details yet to be worked out. Greg, what are you thinking when you see some of these people go by?
Look, I'm very happy for Cody Bloy. It's the previous PMO did not, after Jerry Butts left, did not have anyone senior from Atlantic Canada. And Atlantic Canadians have provided a lot of support to this government. And it caused them problems with things like the Nova Scotia massacre.
Yeah. Just stop 1 second here, Greg. I believe that's Jean Chrétien.
Because he has
just listening to him.
He's going to speak, so we're here for a while.
Great thing. He's coming from Fort Smith. I met his father when I was Minister of Indian Affairs. You were not born. And that, yeah, I think that he will do very well. He is respected internationally. You know, I was talking a few minutes to the BBC about him, and they knew him, so it was good.
Pourquoi est-il l'homme de la situation? Parlez-moi en français. Pourquoi est-il l'homme de la situation?
Parce qu'il est bon, et puis qu'il est neuf, et puis qu'il a beaucoup d'expérience, puis il est respecté dans le monde. Alors, j'ai bien confiance. Et là, c'est
Jean Chrétien saying he's
confident, and it's very stimulating, this type of situation. When you're in politics, you like challenges.
How will he do against President Trump? How do you think he'll do with President Trump?
I will do what you can do with him. If you can tell me what he will tell tomorrow, you will have to adjust every day because the president has to be on the news every day. You will love it. He give you news every day. But when you run a job like that, there's more than to be in the news.
What's your advice? What's your advice to Mr. Carney, sir?
Best advice is do your best.
It will be enough to win the next election? Dans sa relation avec Monsieur Trump.
Ben, il va faire de son mieux.
Well, he'll do the best he can. There's no magic solution. This is not a normal situation. We've never seen someone who changes his mind every 5 minutes as President of the United States. It creates problems everywhere, not only in Canada. I gave an interview with the BBC, and they're having problems in Europe as well and around the world. So he'll do his best. I know him well, and I'm very confident.
Mr. Carney facing right now?
It's a tough job, but you don't get in this job to have an easy job. I was on Parliament Hill for 40 years, and it was fun. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Jean Chrétien at 91 there. And that also, I think, a very strong message, sending a strong message to the Liberal Party and to Mark Carney that he is behind Mark Carney, that he is the man to meet the moment. I don't think I ever saw Jean Chrétien at a Justin Trudeau cabinet swearing in. And I do know that there was, some criticism early on anyway, that the team didn't ask for the advice or help from Jean Chrétien and the people around him. Say what you will, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But interesting that Mr. Chrétien is there today as a former Prime Minister and former successful Liberal leader. We're still waiting for Mark Carney to arrive. Greg, sorry I cut you off there, but that's what I got to do. So what do you think about Chrétien being there?
I'm happy to get bumped by any former
Prime Minister. Of course, yes.
No, just with Cody Bloy, he was a very, very strong voice, Rural Caucus, Atlantic Caucus, and I'm happy to see this because I do feel, as an Atlantic Canadian, that there were times that the previous PMO missed issues that were coming out of Atlantic Canada and thought they could just, rag the puck and that they would go away. And these were serious issues, such as the inquiry into how the massacre on, from 5 years ago happened. The impact
There's
of
the chief
oil
of the
prices,
defense staff
things
handing
like that.
in. Yep, you can keep talking. I'm just going to
No.
interrupt you as it goes. Fred, you want to weigh in there on what you're seeing so far? We're expecting Mark Carney in about a minute, so I might jump in on you too. But
yeah, I mean, what we're seeing, of course, is a lot of Trudeau cabinet ministers that are going in. Obviously, it was his government for the last 9 years. But there's a few new faces, but not a lot. It's a lot of the old people that have been running the country for the last 9 years. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges in this election. Carney is new, but this is a fourth mandate the Liberals are asking for. So I think they're going to have a communications issue with that as well, and how they need to somehow frame this and show this that it is different than what we've had.
yeah, I mean, isn't the framing, and anyone jump in here, isn't the framing Canadians want stability? Could that not be the framing? This is a difficult
if that's
time.
What they want, if for sure that could work if that's what they want. If it's stability, but what is stability when you're dealing with complete chaos to the south?
Totally. Well.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny that we're talking about stability because I think, Fred, for the last few weeks, have been asking for an election so that we can get stability, right? So it's funny almost taking away some of the conservative talking points.
Here is Mark Carney arriving. Interesting, he's arriving on his own. We are expecting him to take questions. I will point out that he has taken very few questions since becoming Liberal leader.
Squish. C'est ça. Très bien. Nous sommes très ciblés. On a d'action. Sorry. C'est à cause du oui. Our message, we're a very focused government. Focus on action. We're going to get work. Straight to work right away.
Top priority, sir. Top priority.
Nous sommes ciblés.
We're really focused on action at this time, and that action will start right now. But I'm going in for the ceremony, and I will make remarks afterwards.
Okay, the words that Sherelle had been hearing there, focused, action. One of the things I hear when I talk to people in the camp, we've got a lot of work to do. We've got a lot of work to do. So very action-oriented, I think, is the way they're trying to position both Mr. Carney and the cabinet, which is what, they would make the case during an election campaign, too, that this is a government that can or wants to get things done.
Yeah, totally. I think seeing a bit of the messages that we're probably going to hear the new Prime Minister, I should call him Prime Minister Carney instead of just calling him Mark Carney, after the swearing-in ceremony. So probably going to be more of what we really just heard him say.
Yeah. Let's go to Ashley Burke. She is down there at Rideau Hall. Ashley, you were there probably talking to Mr. Chrétien and getting some initial words from Mark Carney.
Yeah, he just walked in, and as you mentioned, he's talked about how this is a really focused government, and they're really trying to get their message out that they're going to be focused on the trade war as well as the economy. On the campaign, during the leadership campaign, he really talked about how he wants to make Canada the strongest economy in the G7, and that he's going to say more on his way out. There were some questions ahead of today whether or not he would bring in people who were not elected, members of the public, to be part of his cabinet. Clearly, that didn't happen. All of those faces we have seen before, but some of the individuals have not served on cabinet before. And a lot of the time in the past too, of normally, a lot of consideration goes into gender parity, at least in the Trudeau government, as well as regional representation, a different diversity of voices. And this time, because it's a smaller cabinet, we're being told that they had to make it leaner. So some of those things don't exactly match up. For example, regional balance, we're told, is off, and the gender balance is close but not perfect. On the campaign trail during his leadership run, he did say that he wanted to continue with gender parity, and as well said that he wanted to have more, move faster on getting an even number of women and men that were serving as parliamentarians as well there. So this is all really unfolding right now ahead of an election that's looming, and this cabinet might not be in place for long depending on what happens. We know that Mark Carney says that he plans on we know that his sources say, that he plans on triggering an election sometime before Parliament was set to resume this month, and that there'll be a vote at some point at the end of April, early May. And after that, there could be, it depends what happens in that election. This cabinet this could be the end of it after that.
You, Ashley Burke, she's down there at Rideau Hall monitoring everyone coming and going. Right now, they're all sort of in the room now. The 20 or so cabinet ministers, I believe we're at 20, that will get in there and be sworn in, plus Melanie Joly, I should add. So we're probably at 21. She's going to be sworn in virtually later. And of course, Mark Carney himself, who is still the Prime Minister designate until he takes this oath of office. One thing that strikes me here, David, and I'll bring you in here. So, you know, just to compare it to other swearing-ins, I don't know how many I've done at this stage, too many probably. Usually this is, as I said, sort of a festive event. People arrive with their family, their children. Mark Carney arrives alone, talks about work. It feels to me like he's approaching this as sort of like a job. Like this is the, you know, the job he's taking on. This is not something that his family is involved in. We saw his wife on Sunday, but it's not, you know, it's not all the other things that you would normally see in a cabinet swearing in. And I guess that speaks to the time, but I also think that speaks to his approach to how he will be as Prime Minister.
I think it's a safe assumption that a former central banker of two G7 economies is going to be a little bit less flashy than what we saw under Justin Trudeau. I don't know if that's the hockey goalie snowboarder contrast that he kept talking about when speaking to the differences between the two. But it's not a time for kind of fluff. And I think that's kind of the lesson you have to take from what's going on right now. When times are right for sunny ways, as they were believed to have been in 2015, you can do a lot of the theatrical things and do a lot of the things that sort of bring a sizzle and show business component to a cabinet swearing in. But right now we have the most powerful man on earth running the most powerful military and most powerful economy in the world, talking about using economic coercion, unleashing economic harm, costing hundreds of people in the steel industry their jobs already, and talking about annexation, of Canada and absorbing it into the United States of America. Yeah. So, I don't know how you put celebration on that. Sunday was the celebration. Sunday night, they had their party. They had their after party. He gave his speech. They had their moments. This is very much about, a business, swearing in your executive team today.
That's right, yeah, exactly.
Having a cabinet meeting at 2 o'clock today. Yep. And then, at some point in the coming days, making your first foreign trip to go meet with your key historic allies in the United Kingdom and in France, and finding ways to work together to deal with who you thought was your key historic ally, but is becoming less and less and less with the United States every day. Control
room did the count for me because it was hard to count in real time. We're up at 24. That includes Mark Carney. That includes Melanie Joly, who will be sworn in virtually later. But that is a very small cabinet and compared to what we have seen historically, and certainly sends the message that this is a cabinet that is focused on a small number of things. I'd like your thoughts on that, Fred, the way Mark Carney is presenting in this moment and what that does to Pierre Poilievre and Conservatives and how they shift or don't. Because, one of the things Mr. Poilievre has been doing is trying to introduce himself to Canadians and warm himself up a little bit by bringing his wife into things and showing the children. So it's kind of a different contrast when you see that here.
Yeah, well, the whole ground has shifted on the Conservatives, and I'll talk about that in a second. But for Carney, this is a part of his presentation, a part of his narrative, a part of his show. This is a TV show right now. We're watching this. They're getting sworn in. It's for us to see that this is, the man for the moment. We're dealing with a major issue in the South, and he's going to be that guy that rolls up his sleeves and gets to work. That's the story they want to tell, so it makes sense that they're showing that. The pageantry does not fit this time, so they are clearly understanding narrative and how to focus this. So kudos to them for that. On the Conservative side, Poilievre dominated for the last number of years on certain issues. The ground has shifted drastically. He needs to refine his message and figure it out. I'm not convinced they've done that yet. They are working on it. They're doing different things, and he's out today, I believe, at 2 o'clock. And we'll see what his message is then, and if that meets the moment as well.
What are you thinking about as you see some of those people go in there, Cheryl?
Well, it's clearly very much like a begin as you mean to go on type of thing. So I think what we've seen is probably laying that out. I'm interested in some of the portfolios that we don't really know yet. Do we know who's, or have we, environment is in and that's such a key thing because who's going to lead the charge on that? And there are some really good communicators that in this group of people, and are they going to get the chance to really shine? Are they going to, I'm thinking of someone like Nate Erskine-Smith. Is he going to be someone that they're going to want to put out front and really sell some of those really key, important policies? Because that's something that the Trudeau government really struggled with, was putting the right people who could deliver the messages that they were trying to put out. You have people like Anita Anand, Dominic LeBlanc, we already know, what type of portfolio he's going to get. But how are they going to make use of the people that he actually has and that he's given these jobs to in the best way? Because if you want to, have Canadians believe that you were the right person for this job and you can put together the right team for this job, or do you have the voices there to do it? And he does, but is he going to give them the portfolios to really, use that to the best of their advantage?
Yeah, I think your point about communicators is an important one, because that was a struggle for this government, and I'll get you guys to weigh in on that in just a moment. But just so we know, there are 24 people, including Mr. Carney, who are there, 17 people not in cabinet. And so those are all people who are either not running again, like some of these people, Mark Holland, for instance, but Yara Sachs, Jean-Yves Duclos, Diane Poutier, they are all running again, but they have not been put into this Carney cabinet, this first Carney cabinet.
I think it's actually 18 if you count Karina Gould, because she would have voluntarily left the last cabinet to run for leadership.
She wasn't in the cabinet at the end, I think is what the difference is.
You know what I mean? Like she was until she declared it that she stepped up. But Terry Beach, Jean-Yves Duclos, Darren Fisher, Mark Holland, Ahmed Hussein, Goody Hutchings, Marcy Ian, Deanne Lebatilier, Lawrence Macaulay, Mark Miller, Mary Ng, Ruby Sahota, Harjit Sajjan, Yara Sachs, Pascal St-Ange, Jenna Sudds, Arif Farani, and of course Karina Gould. That's a lot of familiar faces, either not running again, I'd say about half of them are probably not running again. My in the moment math, and of course Karina Gould. She's put a statement on her Twitter, if we can, on her social media, if we can maybe get that up just for later in the show to see what she has to say. But that camp, Rosie, I spoke to some of her supporters last night. Karina Gould's people taking it pretty hard.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Taking it pretty hard. They felt they spoke for a progressive element of the party, that while it didn't amount to much, in the final numbers. Who knows where she was in terms of second choices. The Freeland camp has been spinning out that she was second on a bunch, and she actually did better than the 8% she got. But she's not included in this, and Stephen Guilbeault is there. It's curious to see, Carney made it pretty clear in his speech, the Prime Minister, soon-to-be Prime Minister, did, that he wants to be an economic liberal. He still wants to focus on social justice, social policy, and the environment. But it's about sticking to the bread and butter productivity and economic issues right now, because that's what the moment demands.
Stephen Guilbeault, though, was ready to turn his back on a consumer carbon tax, and Karina Gould was not. She was still tinkering with some idea of it. So, this is how politics goes. And I do know that she did manage to get under his skin a little bit during the debate. And sometimes, that is enough to see you not get where you want. That's the gamble, right? When you're running to be leader, and whether you get back in. Doesn't mean she won't be in a future cabinet, because, lots of Liberals like her. But the magnitude of Mark Carney's win meant that he didn't have to do anything for anyone.
Totally. It was pretty united from the numbers. But it's funny that we're talking about communications, and particularly Karina Gould, because I think a lot of folks who were paying attention to the Liberal leadership race were quite impressed, actually, by Karina Gould and Karina Gould's ability to communicate with people. And totally appreciate and hear how Mark Carney is trying to meet the moment from an economic perspective, from a steady hand perspective. But the next thing that comes is folks will be harmed, whether that's their budgets, whether that's their jobs, whether that's their ability to pay for stuff. And you're going to need somebody who speaks like a real person and who's able to go talk to those folks and tell them, here's how the government's doing. And I think Karina did that effectively. So that'll be interesting. The other thing that, we touched on a little bit with Karina is, I remember in one of the debates, she talked about how, well, this is what liberal values are. And we had talked kind of off scene at that moment saying, well, I think that's what Justin Trudeau liberal values were, right? That's not necessarily the traditional liberal values. So I think by making that shift, it is very clear that actually the liberal values that Karina was talking about are not necessarily what this government is going to be about. And what does that look like in an election time when a lot of folks who voted Liberals the last few elections did so because they thought Justin Trudeau did. So I think that again, different time requires different things, but I think that those are interesting things to pay attention to.
For sure. That is the inside of Rideau Hall there, the ballroom, where they are getting set up for the cabinet to be sworn in. Those new ministers, and of course the new First Minister, and that is the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, also set to take this oath of office for the very first time. He's held a public office like this. He still has to be elected, which he will do at some point. That's another question we don't have an answer to, is where he's going to run. There's all sorts of ridings floating out there. He might get asked that very question today. Greg, what are you making of who you're seeing there, and whether it does, beyond Cody Blaise making you happy, whether it does what it needs to do for right now for Mr. Carney?
Yeah, I sorry to play to my regional strength there, but
that's good.
On Karina, I would just point out that she was House Leader, and we are probably not going back into Parliament. I would remind people, and people around Mark Carney as well, that there was a point during the campaign where Karina Gould needed to make an appeal to hit the second to last fundraising level. And then for her final, she didn't. And I was at a Carney event where people talked about the importance of having somebody like Karina Gould to stay in the race. So we'll see what happens. If there is an election, and we all think there's going to be an election, it also gives people an opportunity to perform and show what they're going to do. I also note this week in my email box from the Liberal Party of Canada was an email from Michael Coteau, Toronto area MP, former provincial cabinet minister, but a supporter of Karina Freeland. And he was pitching... Chrystia Freeland, sorry.
Yeah, all good.
Coffee hasn't kicked in. And he was making a fundraising appeal, yet he had supported another candidate. So I think there are signs there that people understand that this is a very different time, and we're going to be in an election very, very soon, and you'll probably see more of that.
Yeah, it's a little surprising that Chrystia Freeland is there, although I suppose it would have been more surprising if she wasn't there. Sherelle.
Yeah, I mean, her and Mark Carney are very close, so it'd be.
I don't know how close they are. I'm not sure that's the case anymore.
A godparent relationship.
That was a while ago. Let's put that out there. Yeah.
But it's, she does, keeping her there, I think, also might irks Donald Trump a little, and maybe that might be playing into it.
Yeah, have a bad cop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Putting her in a portfolio where, the fact that she's not the best communicator isn't necessarily, she's not really going to do any damage, I don't think, at transport. So that's she's a smart person. Why not make use of the skills that she does have? But I think it would be odd if she was kept out entirely. But given her history and given, don't keep her too close, but keep her close.
Yeah, Fred?
Huge missed opportunity. I think if you want to differentiate from the Trudeau cabinet, you eliminate the person who was his right-hand person for the last decade instead of bringing her in. To me, this was a mistake. I don't think anyone thinks she's a good communicator. I don't think she's been very effective in her roles. So I don't know why they feel the need to bring her in. She got 8% in the leadership. She got crushed with all this fanfare that she was supposed to have. I think he would have been much better off for his own election chances if he just removed.
Is it just to make him look magnanimous then?
If I was to play devil's advocate, I think if she was left out, the Conservatives would be trying to keep their theme that he's just like Trudeau.
I don't think we'd be defending Freeland.
And that he would be, once again, he's pushing out a female cabinet minister.
They did defend her in question period. Why is this fake feminist prime minister pushing out the female prime minister for Mark Carney? That's got to be part of the dynamic here, right? That so much of what led up to the events of December 16th when she quit on Fall Economic Statement Day was that the rumors were that Mark Carney was being asked to replace her as Minister of Finance. Excluding her now is potentially problematic. There is a constituency out there that does support her. A lot of the 416 MPs did support her too, and Toronto was a big battleground for them in the upcoming election to that point. But also, political instincts and communication skills aside, nobody doubts her work ethic and intellect and abilities, right? Like she works hard, she is capable. Transport is not finance, right? It is not the Deputy Prime Minister's job. It's not even frontline on the Canada-US stuff, which is an interesting thing. But there are reasons to keep her in internally, and also just the narrative was that he's always been in the hunt to take her job is what you would see reported mostly in the Globe and Mail leading up to the resignation. So you probably want to put a bit of a lid on that for internal.
And Sherelle's absolutely right in that she's been told repeatedly that her communication skills are not great. So she has now an opportunity to do this. Transport is not an easy portfolio. No. Airports, ports. We know it wasn't all that long ago. We had massive issues at our airports. And as Anita Anand said when she had the portfolio, it is a portfolio that affects every riding in Canada. So you learn really quickly. It could be a bit of a double-edged sword here.
Yeah, it is. It is also a portfolio where, in normal times, you hand out a lot of money. And you promise a lot of things in order to get votes. So yeah, the high-speed train, if that actually ever happens, there are things there that you could use to your advantage. But it is certainly not. It is not the cabinet place that Chrystia Freeland probably expected. Michaëlle Jean is there in the room with her husband. I guess former GGs get invited to these such things. We are expecting this, well, it's said we're supposed to start at 11. I think we are running a little bit late, if I'm going to be honest. But the swearing in will get underway very shortly. Let's bring back Ashley Burke, who's at Rideau Hall, to what to expect for the rest of the day. Ashley.
Well, Rosie, right now we're waiting for the ceremony, as you mentioned, to start. But after that, we're expecting for Canada's new Prime Minister at that point, Mark Carney, to walk out the Rideau Hall doors behind me and come out and give a press conference with his cabinet standing behind him. We're expecting him to give a speech that's about 10 minutes long as he addresses Canadians, and then take about 20 minutes or so of questions. We're told that after that, he's going to meet with his cabinet for the first time, where you can expect that he's going to be talking about some of those big issues he said that they've been talking about, how focused they're on the U.S.-Canada file as well as the economy, and that after that he's going to come out, we're told, and announce whatever decision that they've made. And that's when cabinet ministers will hear from for the first time today, and reporters there will be able to ask them questions. So that's kind of how we're expecting the rest of the day to play out from this point. We know that he spent the past week meeting with a series of officials to try and prepare or get up to speed, including the Chief of Defence Staff, the Fentanyl Czar, Ontario's Premier, all of the people that are really handling this U.S.-Canada file. And his sources say his transition team has also been really working on what his first few days as Prime Minister will look like. We know that he's expected to head on his first international trip, as you've talked about, to Paris and London. That's somewhere where the Prime Minister recently was, making Canada's case on the world stage, trying to shore up some relationships and tighten trade relationships so that Canada doesn't have to rely so much on the U.S., as well as make EU allies know what's going on here in terms of Trump threatening for Canada to become a 51st state, what he's talked about in terms of Canada's sovereignty. So a similar trip we're expecting Mr. Carney to go on. It'll be interesting to see with who he meets with during that.
Okay, Ashley, thank you so much for that. That is David Johnston there on your screen. You can see he's also a former Governor General there for the swearing in of Mark Carney's first cabinet. He's also going to hold a cabinet meeting later today, his first cabinet meeting, and his transition team, including his transition chief of staff, Marco Mendocino, are getting all of the sort of ducks in a row for these first number of days. One of the first things that we might expect to see from Mr. Carney is a move to get rid of the increase to the carbon tax, which is supposed to happen on April 1st. He might be able to just get rid of it altogether, which was a promise of his. That's something that we would certainly expect to see in these first days of Mark Carney as Prime Minister. And then, as Ashley pointed out, off to Europe to meet with a couple of key allies, including, we have confirmed, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer. Certainly, I would expect as well that he would get a meeting with Emmanuel Macron as an attempt from Canada to shore up allies that it needs in this critical time, given what is happening south of the border. There is Adrienne Clarkson with her husband, John Ralston Saul. All the Governor Generals are out to be here for this cabinet swearing in. I'm sure there's one that we won't see. I'll just move right along. Yeah, everyone forgot about that one. Julie Payette, I don't think we've seen her since she left her job. But anyway, the others are all there to be there for the swearing in. Let's talk a little bit maybe about how big a deal it is for someone who has never been elected to be Prime Minister on this day and forming his first cabinet. Like, this is quite a historic moment. Fred. Yeah. Yeah.
We have someone who's never been a parliamentarian, whether it be a senator or elected to any office, going into this role. So it is incredibly unique. It's our system. It's how it works.
Yeah.
And I believe he'll be tested soon enough at the polls, so it's not like we need to wait for a by-election.
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So it is a very unique thing to see.
David?
Yeah, I think the last time we had a prime minister who did not have a seat in the House of Commons was John Turner in 1984. Right. Of course, he'd been a cabinet minister and a member of parliament, for years before that. But he found himself in the awkward position that I don't know if you could get away with in the modern media age of watching the House of Commons from the visitors gallery and things like that before going into the election. Which is why I think part of the reason why the calculation is from the Carney team that Parliament's just not going to come back. They are going to. There's going to be another trip to Rideau Hall before the 24th of March to start the election, because the idea of Parliament coming back from prorogation with a prime minister with no seat in the House of Commons having a throne speech read by the King's representative in the unelected upper chamber, and then maybe very quickly losing a confidence vote, depending on where the NDP are at this point in the political cycle. To use Fred's point, that is no way to set and control your narrative. That is a very bad way to limp into an election. So better to say Liberals have had their choice, Canadians, it's time for them to have theirs, and let's go, right? So I think we will have this unelected prime minister for a period of time. Who knows where Mark Carney is going to run? There's some suggestion he could run in the north. There's some suggestion he could run in an Edmonton seat, where he launched.
Toronto seat.
A Toronto seat, or here an Ottawa seat. Who knows, right? Given the stakes of the election, I mean, thinking about it tactically, and the people who actually work on campaigns may have a better sense of this. I don't know if Edmonton's a great idea, because you probably have to spend a chunk of time in Edmonton, and you need to be in Ontario, Quebec, the Atlantic, and the lower mainland of British Columbia to win this election if you're the Liberal leader. And not only will you have to deal with Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives in an Alberta seat, you're going to have to deal with Danielle Smith, right? She is not going to sit on the sidelines of this one.
That wouldn't be a great idea at all.
So I just think maybe, it's brave, it's bold, it's unconventional. Politically, it might be somewhat suicidal. So I don't know if you do it.
And just so everyone understands, because I have had emails about this. This is some of Mark Carney's inner circle coming in here. Marco Mendicino, who will be a familiar face to you, running his chief of staff. That's Braden Cayley, who is the deputy chief of staff for Mark Carney. Jerry Butts, also probably a familiar name or face for people. He was the principal secretary to Justin Trudeau and had to resign in controversy. He has been playing a role for Mark Carney in the campaign. Don't think he has any formal role at all inside the office, or is expected to have a formal role inside the office. Janice Charette is there as well. You can see the blonde woman standing up in the black. She's the former clerk of the Privy Council, and she has been working not for Mark Carney, but to help the transition, the political piece of the transition for this new government, because there's David Lametti. He is also the former Justice Minister, also has been playing a role as a good friend of Mark Carney's. A transition of this nature usually takes a couple of weeks. It is a complicated thing on the best of days. To do it in days has been very, very challenging for those people there on your screen who have been involved in this. And it helps, of course, that everyone's on the same team broadly, but having to get Mark Carney up to speed on issues of national security, get a security clearance for some of the people that don't have it. All of those things have been really happening at lightning speed. Again, for a prime minister who has never held elected office. And he's stepping into this role, obviously, as a former governor of the Bank of Canada in England with an enormous amount of experience. But this is a little bit different. And some of those people that you saw there on your screen playing some of those key roles, David.
I'm just looking at some of the regional representation here, comparing it to the last cabinet. I mean, obviously, there's going to be drops, right, when you're reducing the numbers. By my math right now, and we don't know where Mark Carney is going to run, so I'm leaving him sort of out of this equation. There were 16 cabinet ministers from Ontario in the Trudeau government. There are 11 that we saw go in there today.
Yep.
There were 9 from Quebec in the Trudeau government. There are 6 that we've seen go in there today, plus including Melanie Joly. British Columbia had 3. 1 today. Newfoundland and Labrador had 2, 1 today. New Brunswick had 2 today. Nova Scotia 1-1, PEI down 1, and Manitoba holds at 1. So there's no representation from Saskatchewan because there's no Liberals in Saskatchewan. There are 2 Liberals in Alberta, in George Chahal and Randy Boissonneau. Neither of them are here today. There are 4 Liberals in Prince Edward Island, and none of them are here today. Lawrence Macaulay, the long-serving cabinet minister from that province, has announced that he is not seeking re-election, but you have Bobby Morrissey, Sean Casey, and Heath MacDonald MacDonald there, and they didn't make the cut. So, you know,
and why are you pointing this out? Why do you think that's important for people to think about?
It's not a law, but the tradition is that every province gets a seat at the cabinet table. That's a convention. There are moments in time where that has not happened, like currently, you know, with Alberta, Randy Boissonnault had been in cabinet. A bunch of stuff happened with him and maybe another Randy or not another Randy, and he was eventually removed from cabinet, and then questions about his Indigenous heritage just became too much of a political problem to bear. So he had to leave. George Chahal did not come in, so that's their options. There have been times, like I remember when I was working in Newfoundland and Labrador, of course, then the Harper years, he was the Prime Minister. Danny Williams led the blood feud between the provincial Conservatives and the federal Conservatives and wiped out all of the Conservative seats. Rob Moore, a New Brunswick MP, who I think was born in Grand Falls or Gander, so he had some roots in Newfoundland. He was the regional minister, but there was no one in cabinet. You have no choice there. You have no one to pick from. Yeah. You have 4 people to pick from on PEI, and they didn't pick anyone. That is a question I have when you come from small places and you lose a big thing, it's a thing. And I'm curious to see how they're going to respond to that.
Indigenous leaders are just arriving there at the swearing-in from the various organizations. Anyone else want to weigh in on that? I mean, I'm from Winnipeg, but so like we're covered. We got a Manitoba seat, but I wonder if you can make the argument that this is a transition cabinet, that we are dealing with a particular set of issues, that this isn't what a future cabinet would look like. I mean, he'll get these questions, but I wonder whether that argument holds, Fred.
Well, as David pointed out, I never thought of it. BC and Alberta, the 2 most western provinces and the 3rd and 4th biggest in this country, have only 1 cabinet minister in the 2 of them. That's incredible.
Though again, he might say he's from Alberta. Whether you buy that argument, I don't know.
But even the fact that BC only has 1 is strange. Sure. It's the 3rd largest province and down to 1. The North as well, the territories. Arctic sovereignty is a major, major issue right now. It's really coming into light. Our Arctic is the most underdeveloped of all the Arctic nations. We don't have connections to the actual connections to the Arctic, and we are going into a global crisis now with what's happening. And I don't know if the representation here is going to fit this in what they're doing now. Obviously, the soon-to-be Prime Minister is from Northwest Territories. Maybe that's where he'll run. Maybe he'll get a voice through that.
What do you think, Greg, as someone who's also from a small place?
Yeah, I love to see Conservatives argue for bigger cabinets. Just kidding, Fred. Quick tale, the 04 election, I was the tour in advance, media wrangler for Atlantic Canada. Paul Martin went into PEI the very start of the election, and we never went back. We didn't have to. In 05-06, long election, same thing at the beginning, but at the end, all of a sudden we had to add a second trip to PEI. They still held every seat, but 2 years later, Gail Shea was elected and served as a minister in Harper's government. And then you put attention back. My guess is that Mark Carney will be doing a visit to PEI very, very soon to shore that up, because you don't want to lose that.
You can't take it for granted.
You cannot take it
and you don't want to be
granted.
seen to be taking it for granted either. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
But it is hard at any time to make a cabinet that satisfies people, everyone. That just doesn't happen, frankly. And in this case, it's not satisfying regional demands, but as Ashley pointed out, it's also not gender balanced, which is a convention that Justin Trudeau said, right?
Yeah.
There's no requirement for that to happen either.
Yeah, and I've done the math on that too, with the 24 names that we know are associated with the first Carney cabinet, including Mark Carney. There's 13 men, there's 11 women. So it's not 50-50. But it's pretty close, right? Yeah. You can argue whether that is a politically unwise move or what it is, but that is a break from Justin Trudeau as well. I would presume, though, they skewed very close to it. 13 and 11 when you're down to 24 is pretty close, right? Especially when the Prime Minister is tipping it, right?
I mean, I suppose I would argue that there is probably a very large segment of the population who's going to see that and say, okay, great, the scales are going back in the way they should be. And there's a lot of people who
enough
are
of this power for women.
Exactly. Let's do things on merit. There's clearly not enough, women who are competent enough to hold these files. And I'll speak as like the resident British Columbian. It is kind of strange that there is only 1 person from BC, in this cabinet. It's not a province that the Liberals can really take for granted.
No.
They really do need to, obviously, yes, there's the election is usually decided before the polls in BC close. Yes, we know that. But it doesn't mean that if you want to hold on to it, there's a lot of issues that are going to be really relevant to BC, and having that representation there, I think right now is important because it is a very, very competitive place.
Yeah, it's also putting a lot of pressure on Jonathan Wilkinson as the guy to take it all. Yeah.
British Columbia did have a lot of cabinet ministers: Qualtrough, Murray,
and now they're
Sajjan.
having one.
And
they're not running.
They're not running again, and I think that's the bigger
That's part
issue.
of the problem.
Yeah.
And this would
that's
also
a very good point. Yes.
It's actually the point I was going to make. So
Oh,
Greg
well.
walked all over it. No, but that's good. He's a smart dude.
Tends to happen.
But I would also say this is maybe explains the conversations with Christy Clark. Right?
Right,
Would have been a woman
That's
from British Columbia, and could they have gotten this together to have the unelected people coming into cabinet? That would have balanced the scales a bit more regionally, and like there are going to be like 3 or 4 open seats in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia, right? Joyce Murray's seat, and the people, it's Harjit Sajjan's seat,
Carla Qualtrough.
but also there's like Fleetwood Port Kells, where Ken Hardy is not running again.
Yeah.
There are other seats in that area that are decent seats for the Liberals, where Christy Clark could conceivably run. I think maybe that would be her focus right now, is finding what is the best seat for her to go into and maybe come into a future Carney cabinet.
I mean, it is mostly about incumbency, but Terry Beach was in.
He's not there,
he's not there. He was a Chrystia Freeland supporter. He's a BC MP that could have been put in cabinet, but as we've seen, Chrystia Freeland supporters, other than Chrystia Freeland, don't tend to haven't really made it into cabinet. So,
plus his portfolio was a bit smaller and directed.
It was, yes.
So
yes. You could have questioned whether it needed to be a minister position at all.
Well,
I think.
that happened with a lot of portfolios as they broadened it out. Like Joanne Thompson, the MP from St. John's East, she was strictly the Minister of Seniors. That's not a standalone line department ministry, but she was a full cabinet minister in that role. Is that something that needs to be? Nothing against the seniors. I'm going to be one of them very soon. But that is that a full standalone ministry, or is that latched on to a bigger portfolio as it has been in the past?
Okay, if you're just tuning in, you're looking inside the ballroom at Rideau Hall, which is today stacked with lots of special guests of the next Prime Minister. He is not yet Prime Minister. Former Governors General are there, and some of Mark Carney's campaign team, and some of those people who will be inside the Prime Minister's office after this ceremony takes place today. There are 24 members of the cabinet, including Mark Carney. 17 members of cabinet who were under Justin Trudeau in the previous cabinet don't have jobs today. They have either been removed or they're not running again, and so were not included in this first Carney cabinet, that's what we'll call it. So you will see today some familiar faces, because some of these key positions need to be held given the threat from Donald Trump right now, and given the message that the new Prime Minister is trying to send today. That is, I believe, members of Mark Carney's family arriving there, including his wife at the front. And now the new ministers will make their way in to this swearing-in ceremony that will begin what will be known as the Mark Carney era. Whether it is very short or not, we don't know, because we are expecting, of course, an election call to come within days. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was in that building just a couple of hours ago, speaking to the Governor General, offering his resignation and direction for Mark Carney to become the next Prime Minister and to form his own ministry. That, of course, will all need to be tested with Canadians, with you. Mark Carney has become Liberal leader because of Liberals, and become Prime Minister because of a decision by the Liberal Party. Whether he can hold on to that role and title as Prime Minister is something that will be decided in an election. We are waiting for them to enter the room shortly, and the swearing-in ceremony will get underway. We are going to hear from Mark Carney after this. He is going to take some questions. The Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, will also be out later this afternoon to give his impressions of what he has seen here today. Already getting emails from Conservatives saying it's the same old, all the same people that were around Justin Trudeau, around Mark Carney. Of course, that is because we haven't had an election, so Mark Carney hasn't really been able to put his full stamp on the Liberal Party. That is something that would happen as new candidates perhaps pop up in certain places where people aren't running. That is his wife, Diana, sitting there on the right of your screen. And I believe possibly one of his brothers is there as well. And they will make their way in pretty soon here, David.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see we know some of the key portfolios. There's not going to be a deputy prime minister in this cabinet, which is an interesting choice. I know that's not a formal role. It is more of a ceremonial role and also a nod to the political importance of that particular person or the function they are asked to take on in the government. But I wonder, Greg has talked about this many times, that when the Trudeau people look back at their decision to offer Chrystia Freeland Finance and Deputy Prime Minister, do they wish they had offered her one or the other, right? And, maybe making a minister that is almost too big to fail and too important to move, by creating that kind of a position. Carney certainly avoiding that.
Yes.
You can see who the priorities, the key people are going to be: LeBlanc, Joly, Champagne, Anand, right, and Guilbeault, as a Quebec lieutenant. So you have, those are, I would say, the very top sort of portfolio ministers, and also politically focused. I'm assuming Bill Blair is staying on the defense. There's been no talk of movement there. And with everything happening with NATO and Ukraine, you also want some consistency on that front as well.
Yeah, for sure. And apparently he also loves the job. I don't think that's a consideration, whether you like the job or not, but apparently he does really like it. So but those are key people in key portfolios at a time when the country needs to perform, frankly, needs to make big decisions about its economic future and its security. And so those people, including David McGuinty, I'll throw him into the mix as well. Yeah, as public safety minister, a role we expect that he will keep, given that he's been leading the charge on the border for a couple of months now and has already forged some relationships with people in Trump's cabinet. Let's toss this around as we wait for Mark Carney and his cabinet to arrive. This is just an exercise for fun, just humor me. If Donald Trump was not doing what he's doing right now, would this cabinet need to look different? How much is what he is saying and doing influencing who gets to have these important roles right now? Who wants to jump in? Mel?
Yeah, I think we're seeing that exactly. I think he keeps talking about meeting the moment, and I think we're seeing some of the most maybe more statesman-like, more serious cabinet ministers being added in. Again, I'm going to go back to, we keep talking about still affordability being the most important thing. How does that play into a time when those folks that have been named aren't necessarily, maybe I should correct that, Minister Erskine-Smith does take that on.
A lot about
does take that on himself, but what does that mean? How different is it from Trudeau? We talked a lot about how a lot of the ministers are ministers in the same role, and you were just talking about Minister McGuinty, a very new minister. I remember when we were talking about and seeing how he was going to do so, what that looks like in continuation with what's going on with President Trump. But
let's dip into this here. I think they're just giving us the lay of the land for how the program is going to unfold.
The ceremony will now begin with the entrance of the Clerk of the Privy Council and Secretary to the Cabinet, John Hannaford, the Secretary to the Governor-General, Ken McKillop, and the Assistant Clerk of the Privy Council, Jana Rinaldi. The ceremony
will now begin with the arrival of the Clerk of the Privy Council and Secretary to Cabinet, John Hannaford, the Secretary to the Governor-General, and the Assistant Clerk, Jana Rinaldi.
Good morning. Bonjour. To begin today's swearing-in ceremony, I invite you to please rise to welcome the ministers, ministers-designate, the Prime Minister-designate, and their Excellencies, the Governor-General of Canada, and Mr. Whit Fraser. To begin the
ceremony, please rise to welcome the Minister, the Minister's Designate, the Prime Minister Designate, and Her Excellency, the Governor-General of Canada.
Okay, these are the ministers of Mark Carney's first cabinet making their way here into the ballroom where they will be sworn into their new roles, even if they were cabinet ministers before. Because Justin Trudeau has resigned, that cabinet was also dissolved, and so they must be sworn in again into their new roles, or the same roles in the case of some, like Melanie Joly and probably David McGuinty, and of course Mark Carney himself. They're arriving to a place he's been before. He's certainly been to Rideau Hall, but never in this way and never in this job. This is a moment that he has also aspired to for a very, very long time, flirting with the idea of becoming the Liberal leader and a politician for many years, and finally at this time seeing an opportunity created, ironically, by Chrystia Freeland in part, and now becoming Canada's 24th
Good morning, everybody.
Prime
My name's
Minister.
Ken McKillop, and I'm the Secretary to the Governor General. I would like to welcome everybody to Rideau Hall today for the swearing in of the 24th Prime Minister of Canada and the 30th Canadian Ministry. I'd like to take a moment to share with you a traditional activity that was initiated just prior to the beginning of the ceremony, the lighting of the hulik, a traditional Inuit lamp. This lamp is used in the north to bring light and warmth to the home. We light the hulik to mark important events such as today's ceremony. And we are grateful for the presence of Elder Canon Iga Atikutsiak from Arctic Bay, who lit the hulik and will remain and maintain its light and warmth throughout the ceremony. Nakumik.
I'd now like to invite Verna McGregor to provide some words of welcome.
Koi kakina. Bonjour tout le monde. Hello, everybody. Very honored to be here today, and I'd like to welcome you to our traditional unceded lands here, and I'm very honored, Your Excellency, for the invitation. I do many openings for constituents in Ottawa here, but I always talk about the significance here because this is so special for us as Algonquin. We're known as the Mamaninawak, the nomads, and we're known for the birch bark canoe. And we would meet here in the summer prior to contact to talk about what's going on the land. But this confluence here is very special because it represents balance of the four directions, the four seasons, the four stages of your life. And so, and I find it interesting that Parliament and Rideau Hall and all the government headquarters are located here, because I think this is special too as well for leadership. And I'm honoring the new leader today too as well. And I was thinking about you today. I said it's like the geese, and you have the head, the person at the head, Ganiganich, and they face the head waters. And I think we're in for always challenges, but even more so today. So I'm going to honor you and all of you with a little opening prayer and thanking everybody. And so I say, miigwech, ojeni gashkito, jama maundose konshe nongo, mame kakina niganich. Shwe mishnoni na because miigwech onje kakina gagishen ta noje mam dege nindekimenon. Shkaiki kwejin kaso nindekimenon. We don't kakina pamasaje konje nagadawam dan kakina guch nindekimenon. Mam dege nishnabe ki. Miigwech onje kakina ete kijigo. Kizis to be kizis a shichanungshak. We don't con no commisnan on jay and agadawabdan kakina gujia nibi a shich nimashomsanan. Kizis on jay and agadawabdan kakina gujia pamad sajik the niswa gonshe. Migwech on jay na sewen kaki mijin chimino pamad sian on jay. We don't qua kakinan and Jino and Daganak, Nimashomsanan, the Gokmisnan, a shich nidondanis, on jay non gomonje, the Bashkadagama, Kamashedinis, Wagonshe. A shich kakinan and Jino and Daganak, a wesi sak mitigog, Mijaski, Mashkiki, Kakina Gagijendan. Kacheshquat negwe de Seaman, Kego Gajeman, Doshich Kan, and Ojgush negwe de Seaman. We don't qua kakina, Mam de gay, we wisn a jig, the Magas a jig, Akas a jig, Kaye we me God with jig non com chuana ki watch, Chimino Pamadzu watch. Miigwech. I say miigwech 4 times to honor again the 4 directions, the 4 seasons, the 4 stages of our lives. We come from spirit and we return back to spirit. We come from the earth, we return back to the earth. And in my prayer, what I'm saying is, I'm thanking everybody to coming together here. And always a reminder to, as well, to look after the earth. Because again, one of the teachings is that we were all given the original instructions to look after the earth, because we all share the earth. We share the water, we share the air, and the fire of the sun, our internal fires. So that's why, again, Carney, the one in front, it has a big responsibility. And that's why we're having this ceremony today. So miigwech everybody, and have a good day. Merci. Merci à tous.
Thank you, Elder McGregor. Merci, Andy McGregor. Mr. John Hannaford, the Clerk of the Privy Council and the Secretary to the Cabinet, will now seek the Governor-General's consent for the administration of the Oath of Allegiance, the Privy Councillor's Oath, and the Oath of Office to the Prime Minister-Designate.
Excellency, the Prime Minister-Designate has accepted your invitation to form a new government and is prepared to be sworn in. Excellence, le Premier Ministre désigné a accepté votre invitation de former le gouvernement et est disposé à servir le serment.
The Prime Minister-Designate will please come forward to be sworn in. Le Premier Ministre désigné est prié de s'avancer pour
please
prêter
come
serment.
forward to be sworn in.
Mr. Mark Carney.
Mr. Mark Carney.
Moi, Mark Carney.
I, Mark Carney, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, King of Canada, his heirs and successors.
I, Mark Carney, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, King of Canada, his heirs and successors. Moi, Mark Carney.
I, Mark Carney, do solemnly and sincerely swear that I shall be a true and faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III as a member of His Majesty's Privy Council for Canada. I will in all things to be treated, debated and resolved in Privy Council, faithfully, honestly and truly declare my mind and my opinion. I shall keep secret all matters committed and revealed to me in this capacity or that shall be secretly treated of in council. Generally, in all things, I shall do as a faithful and true servant ought to for His Majesty.
I, Mark Carney, do solemnly and sincerely swear that I shall be a true and faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III as a member of His Majesty's Privy Council for Canada. I will, in all things, to be treated, debated, and resolved in Privy Council, faithfully, honestly, and truly declare my mind and my opinion. I shall keep secret all matters committed and revealed to me in this capacity, or that shall be secretly treated of in council. Generally, in all things, I shall do as a faithful and true servant ought to do for His Majesty. Moi, Mark Carney.
I, Mark Carney, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Prime Minister of Canada.
I, Mark Carney, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trust reposed in me as Prime Minister.
Okay, a significant moment for this country and for Mark Carney personally as he takes the oath of office, Privy Council and Prime Minister. Still has some things to figure out there, as you can see, about how this goes. standing with Governor General Mary Simon. And remarkably becoming Canada's 24th Prime Minister, having never held elected office in his life. One of his first tasks will be to try and find a seat for himself when the election is called. David?
But it's just remarkable to see us at this moment, as Mark Carney has been a character in the narrative that led to this moment, right? It was always the promise.
The Governor General and the Clerk of the Privy Council are signing the oath books to formally witness the swearing-in of the Prime Minister, but they're also signing the instruments of advice nominating the new Canadian ministry.
There was also always the promise that he would one day be the finance minister in the Trudeau government, and that persistent specter looming over Chrystia Freeland and even to some degree Bill Morneau back in the day.
Sure, yeah.
We know he was offered the finance job by Stephen Harper, the former Conservative Prime Minister, never took it. Courted potentially to do it by Justin Trudeau, never took it. Chrystia Freeland said she'd offer it to him if she won, and here we are. She is going to be sworn into the Mark Carney cabinet as the Minister of Transport. But it's remarkable that him being this, always the potential and the promise of Mark Carney to come in and bolster the Trudeau cabinet, and here he is replacing Justin Trudeau, succeeding Justin Trudeau, and swearing in his own cabinet.
Yeah, it is a remarkable moment in Canadian politics for sure. A historical moment, yes, but also kind of an incredible political story in terms of how we got here to this moment where Justin Trudeau is no longer Prime Minister, and that man there,
Congratulations,
we will now call Prime Minister.
Et maintenant que la gouverneure générale a signifié son
The
approbation,
Governor General has given her approval. We will move to the swearing-in of Canadian
ministers
ministers.
and ministers designate will please come forward to be sworn in. Les ministres et les ministres désignés
Ministers
sont
and
priés de
ministers
s'avancer
designate
pour
will
prêter
please come forward to be sworn in.
L'honorable Dominique Leblanc,
The Honorable
ministre de
Dominique
Commerce
Leblanc,
international et des
Minister of
Affaires
International
intergouvernementales
Trade
et
and
président du Conseil
Intergovernmental
privé du droit
Affairs
pour le Canada,
and
Honorable
U.S.
Dominique
Canadian
Leblanc, Minister of
relations.
International Trade and Intergovernmental Affairs and President of the King's Privy Council for Canada.
Moi, Dominique Leblanc, je promets et
I,
jure
Dominique
solennellement
Leblanc,
et
do
sincèrement
solemnly and sincerely swear that I shall be a true and faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III as a member of Her Majesty's Private Privy Council. I do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs and Trade.
I, Dominique Leblanc, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of International Trade and Intergovernmental Affairs and President of the King's Privy Council for Canada.
Okay, Dominique Leblanc, a good friend of Justin Trudeau, someone who also had been thought to consider to run for leadership, but got behind Mark Carney, takes on the role of Minister of International Trade and Intergovernmental Affairs, really playing, David, to his strengths, I say, which are political.
Yeah.
He is very good at building relationships.
Yeah, the Canada-U.S. relations component of his responsibilities will probably be the most important thing. I always refer to him on my show as Minister of Janitorial Affairs, because whenever there's a mess, they send Dom LeBlanc in to clean it up. And the biggest mess on the planet right now is happening with the Canada-U.S. border and that trade relationship. So he's got his work cut out. He's the best political athlete in the cabinet. I think that's safe to say. He's going to need every ounce of that skill in the time ahead.
But he was finance minister for a very short period of time, and I must say he was quite thrilled with that job, and he stepped into it, of course, on the day that Chrystia Freeland resigned. So, he stepped up for then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and up for Liberals in that moment.
Mélanie Joly,
A finance minister who never did a fall economic statement or a budget. Bizarre.
à nous et sera assermentée prochainement cet après-midi.
She will be
Honourable
coming to be
Mélanie
sworn
Joly,
in
Minister of Foreign
shortly.
Affairs and International Development, is unable to join us this morning, but will be sworn in at a later time this afternoon.
Melanie Joly is in
Maintenant,
Charlevoix wrapping up
François-Philippe
the
Champagne,
foreign
Minister
ministers
of
meeting. She'll make her way back here to be sworn into the job she already has as Minister of Foreign Affairs, though she's adding international development, because part of what today's exercise is also about consolidating departments and portfolios. All right, here's the new finance minister.
I, François-Philippe Champagne, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully and to the best of my skill and knowledge execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Finance.
I, François-Philippe Champagne, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trust reposed in me as Minister of Finance. Thank you. Prime Minister.
All right, François-Philippe Champagne becoming Minister of Finance. He has done some pretty bold things in his previous portfolio, David, as Minister of Innovation. Been behind, for instance, getting the electric vehicle plants built here, but this is a job he's certainly qualified for.
Certainly a job I think he wanted, perhaps
sure.
coveted, right? That this is the number 2 job in the Canadian government. I think it's safe to say behind the prime ministership is the Minister of Finance. And it was interesting that he was in Washington yesterday with Dominic LeBlanc and Doug Ford to meet with Howard Lutnick. There was no clear, obvious reason why the Innovation Minister would have been there, unless it was your introductory meeting to the Commerce Secretary.
You had a question, didn't you?
Yeah,
you were like,
yeah, because I was like, what's going on with that? But no, he has worked in Canada, U.S., and obviously the economy is an important part of that whole thing. But
Anita Anand, Minister of
he
Innovation,
gets the focus on that,
Science,
while LeBlanc focuses on the relationship.
Anita Anand, Minister of Innovation et Sciences.
Okay, meanwhile, Minister Anita Anand takes on a Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, also an important economic portfolio, the one that François-Philippe Champagne had previously.
I, Indira Anita Anand, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. Moi, Indira Anita Anand,
I, Indira Anita Anand, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and the trusts reposed in me as Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry.
All right, Anita Anand, as you've been saying, David, was not going to run and decided she would run. In part, she says, to deal with Donald Trump. She felt she had a responsibility to do that. Though, obviously, when polls improve, your responsibility also likely gets real.
As retirement plans go, Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry is not a good one, because you're going to be pretty busy.
Yep.
So look, she's the MP for Oakville. I had said earlier that when Navdeep Bains was in this job, things were running through Brandon, Mississauga. Navdeep Bains is from Mississauga.
Did you get emails about that?
I just wanted to correct it. I don't like making mistakes. But look, Anita Anand was elected in 2019. She now adds her biggest economic portfolio. She's been Minister of Defense, Minister of Procurement during the pandemic, President of the Treasury Board, and Minister of Transport.
Yeah.
She has had a lot of
The
portfolios.
Honourable William Sterling Blair, Minister of National Defence. L'Honourable William Sterling Blair, Ministre de la Défense
William
Nationale.
Sterling Blair,
Minister
of
Blair
National
is being
Defense.
sworn in to the job that he already has, but this is technically how it has to go. So he is maintaining his portfolio as Minister of National Defense.
William Sterling Blair, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of National Defense. Thank you, John.
This is also a remarkable event to watch because this cabinet will not last very long. If we are to believe what we are told and what Mark Carney is signaling, that an election is to come, perhaps as an election call, perhaps as early as April 23rd. Obviously, the cabinet remains in caretaker mode, but this is not going to be a cabinet with a long shelf life, David.
Well, Canada cannot be without a government, right? And so even if you go into a 5, 6 week, 7 week, who knows, election campaign, you need people in these critical roles to respond to things that could happen, because the world doesn't stop, and it's certainly at this point in history it doesn't even slow down.
The Honourable Patty Hajdu, Minister of Indigenous Services. Patty
Hajdu, Minister of Indigenous Services.
I, Patricia Hajdu, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Indigenous Services.
I, Patricia Hajdu, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Indigenous Services.
Okay, Patty Hajdu, one of the 11 women being sworn in today, an MP for Thunder Bay, Northern Ontario. Could be important during an election. But I will say, David, if you're looking at this today, you're not going to see, like, so far we don't have any new faces. So that speaks to the way the Conservatives are going to frame this, I think, a little bit. These are all ministers who were in Justin Trudeau's cabinet, now in Mark Carney's cabinet.
Certainly in the senior roles. I mean, Bill Blair is in the same job. Patty Hajdu is in the same job. Jonathan Wilkinson, we believe, is next. I think either he stays. Well, it's out. We know he's staying. Yes, he is staying in his job as Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. So there is continuity in a lot of these key things. The changes are more kind of on the margins, or at least in the swapping of roles. Certainly, Dominic LeBlanc and Champagne
Jonathan Wilkinson,
switching.
Minister of Energy and Natural Resources.
The Honourable Jonathan Wilkinson, Minister of Energy and Natural Resources.
They're all a bit confused at redoing this.
It's hard to know where you're supposed to
I,
know.
Jonathan Wilkinson, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Energy and Natural Resources.
I, Jonathan Wilkinson, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Energy and Natural Resources.
Okay, so Jonathan Wilkinson stays in his portfolio. It is a challenge to show change when you are a new Prime Minister, when you are dealing with the deck of cards that you were left by Justin Trudeau. But that, you know, and again, stability, continuity is important, but you're fighting it on two fronts there. You need to show stability, and you also need to show you're different than the previous guy.
Yeah, but you also don't want to be plunged into this period of economic uncertainty with an entirely inexperienced cabinet, especially going right into an election. Just on Wilkinson staying in energy and natural resources, Champagne going to finance, and I'm not sure how Anita Anand fits into this as Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. If you look at the difficult relationships with some of the premiers, Danielle Smith in particular, she speaks highly of Champagne, speaks highly of Wilkinson relative to someone like Stephen Guilbeault. So those relationships could work to some degree.
Présidente du Conseil du Trésor.
Okay, Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor, President to an economic portfolio, President of the Treasury Board.
Is that a return for her, Rosie? Did she hold that before?
I believe she did, yes. My ear, someone in my ear tells me she did.
Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and the trusts reposed in me as President of the Treasury Board.
I, Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skills and knowledge, execute the powers and trust reposed in me as President of the Treasury Board.
Yeah, she moved into that in the cabinet shuffle precipitated by Chrystia Freeland. There have been so many things that have moved around, you forget.
Yes.
But yes, that's a continuity in that role. Interestingly, Chrystia Freeland will be sworn in a little bit. She's not just Minister of Transport, Rosie. She's also adding internal trade, which with all of the talk about interprovincial trade barriers, Carney saying, I want to build one economy in Canada instead of 13. She has a good relationship with a lot of the premiers, right? With Doug Ford and others, her ability to work with them in the past. So that will be helpful. It goes back to the earlier conversation of, keeping her working behind the scenes on cutting regulatory red tape on interprovincial trade barriers is something that she has a propensity for and relationships with some of the people at the First
Yeah, that would definitely play to her strengths. It also gets her involved, but doesn't put her in the crosshairs of Donald Trump.
Minister of Culture
and she won't really have
Canadian
any profile on
identity.
that part. But she'll be seen to be playing a role for the country, dealing with internal trade. I should tell you that our panelists are still here. We're also joined by senior writer Aaron Wary. We'll bring them in once we get through all this, but this is happening very quickly, so we'll just keep trucking along here and then get some further analysis. Here's Stephen Guilbeault. He is moving to a new job and a new department or a new consolidation of departments called Minister of Canadian Culture and Identity, Parks Canada, and of course becoming Mark Carney's Quebec lieutenant. Culture and identity. I'm not sure what, is that a Quebec issue?
It's going to be heritage.
Sure. Yeah.
He's going to take on the heritage portfolio.
Execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Canadian Culture and Identity, Parks Canada, and Quebec Lieutenant. Thank you. Merci, John.
So what I was told, Rosie, is he will take on the heritage portfolio. That will be part of it. And of course, the Parks Canada will give him responsibility for stewardship of large tracts of Canadian land, which they're trying to protect and preserve as part of the environmental agenda, but also responsibilities for biodiversity. And there's been parts of the oceans that have been set aside, as marine preserve. So he gets to work on that side of the environmental ledger. Terry Duguid, the Cabinet Minister of Manitoba, will be the new Minister of Environment. But Canadian culture and identity, the fight over the CBC, the future of Radio-Canada, the sovereignty of Canada as an independent country versus the U.S.
Right.
This sort of fits into that.
Transport and internal trade.
It also then takes someone out of environment who was much maligned in Western Canada. All right, here now, Chrystia Freeland, the runner-up by not very much for the leadership candidate being sworn in.
I solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Transport and Internal Trade. Moi, Chrystia Freeland,
Chrystia Freeland, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Transport and Internal Trade.
All right, Chrystia Freeland, once Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister and Liberal leadership candidate, taking on a new role for Mark Carney, Minister of Transport and Internal Trade. Friendly greeting there. I think surprising a little bit that, surprising to me that Chrystia Freeland would agree to take on this particular role, though she had really no bargaining or leverage, given that she didn't fare well in the leadership race. But I'm a little surprised that she took on a lesser job.
Yes, it is surprising, though the internal trade is an important one. Sure. And I go back, advice Ed Roberts once gave people. Ed Roberts was a former Lieutenant Governor of Newfoundland and Labrador, former Cabinet Minister there. He said, get the seat at the table. And work out from there. No matter what it is. And your worst day in cabinet is better than your best day as a backbencher, I would suggest, especially
Minister of
if
Health.
you've been the Deputy Prime Minister.
The Honourable Kamal Khera, Minister of Health.
Okay, Kamal Khera, who is entering into a new portfolio. She is a nurse by training. She's becoming the Minister of Health.
I, Kamal Khera, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trust reposed in me as Minister of Health. Kamal
Khera, also a huge fundraiser for the Liberal Party of Canada. as well as being a very capable politician. But that is an important part of being in cabinet too. What can you bring to the table? And that's one of the things that she brings.
Well, yeah, a nurse by background. Did some work actually during the pandemic, like some frontline nursing during the pandemic, she was Minister of Seniors at the age of 35, if I remember correctly, which was an interesting, contrast in terms of what her duties were. But look, this is not just about health delivery. This is about negotiating with provinces, about holding them accountable on getting deals in place and living up to standards, advancing on pharmacare, dental care, all of these
Gary
things. With Mark
Anandasangri,
Cullen
Minister of
gone, now
Justice
falls
and
to
Attorney
Kalakira.
General of Canada, and Minister of
I
Crown
remember
and
talking to her
Indigenous
during the
Relations
pandemic
and
when
Northern
she
Affairs.
had sort of
Honorable Gary
nursing on the
Anandasangri,
side
Gary
because she felt it was her duty to help
Minister
in
of
any way
Justice
that
and
she
Attorney
could.
General of Canada, and Minister responsible for Crown and Indigenous Relations.
I, Gary Anandasangri, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trust reposed in me as Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, and Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs. As Minister of Justice, I will see that the administration of public affairs is in accordance with the law. As Attorney General of Canada, I will uphold the Constitution, the rule of law, and the independence of the judiciary and of the prosecutorial function. I, Gary
Anandasangri, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Justice and Attorney General, and Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs. As Minister of Justice, I will ensure that the law is respected. As Attorney General of Canada, I will ensure that the Constitution of Canada is respected, as well as the independence of the judiciary and the prosecutorial function.
Okay, there's Gary Anandasangri. I'm going to get his name right.
Gary Anandasangri.
How do you get it so well? Anyway, he was the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Justice previously. He is a lawyer by trade, so this makes sense in terms of a position for him. But that's a big portfolio: Justice Minister, Attorney General, and Minister of Crown, Indigenous Relations, and Northern Affairs. So you can see there that, Prime Minister Carney is asking people to take on a whole lot in a bid to keep this cabinet small.
And Gary Anandasangri is also has a reputation as one of the best fundraisers and organizers in the GTA. That when he gets his riding on lockdown, he's out in other people's ridings nearby, helping them get organized, sign up, vote ID, and raise cash. So that matters when your war cabinet is also an election cabinet.
Chief Government Whip. Honorable Richie Valdez, Whip du Chef du Gouvernement.
Chief Government Whip.
Okay, Richie Valdez was the Minister of Small Business, moving into the role of Chief Government Whip, which is not so important when the House is not sitting, I will say.
Yeah, and it's not always a full cabinet post, Rosie, so this is an interesting choice.
Do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Chief Government Whip. Moi, Richie Valdez,
I, Richie Valdez, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and the trusts reposed in me as Chief Government Whip.
Richie Valdez, I remember the last time she was sworn in, which was the first time, she was also very emotional and feeling the weight of that moment.
Well, she was small business minister then.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that these are people, and they are feeling how important their jobs are for however long they have them.
Well, yeah, look, it is a rare moment. If she sees this moving to be the government whip at a time when Parliament is prorogued, unlikely to be dissolved, if she sees it as a demotion, there was nothing in that reaction to suggest that she sees it that way. Clearly, with the new Prime Minister coming in and keeping her in, a leadership role of this sort matters to Richie Valdez, the first Filipina cabinet minister. There was a Filipino cabinet minister in the past, but she was the first woman with Philippines descent to join the federal cabinet.
Stephen Garrett McKinnon, Ministre de l'Emploi et des Familles.
Stephen Garrett,
the Honourable Stephen Garrett McKinnon, Minister
of Jobs and Family.
So Minister McKinnon here picks up families, and I think, David, you understood that he was going to be doing a whole bunch of things in this portfolio.
Yeah, Minister of Jobs and Families. It's not labor, it's jobs. That's an interesting choice. And families, that's also an interesting choice from a branding perspective. So let's have him take the oath.
Stephen Garrett McKinnon,
Stephen Garrett McKinnon, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and the trust reposed in me as Minister of Jobs and Families.
I, Stephen Garrett McKinnon, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Jobs and Families.
So, Rosie, on the conversation we were having earlier, there's no one from Prince Edward Island in this cabinet. Slight correction in the sense that Stephen McKinnon was born in Prince Edward Island. He has family in Prince Edward Island.
Yes, his mom is there. I saw her when I was doing an event a few months ago, yeah.
Worked politically in New Brunswick, but he represents a seat just across the river from where we're sitting in Quebec. So, he is a Quebec cabinet minister even with those roots. Like Anita Anand has Nova Scotia roots. So there's East Coast representation there in abundance, but the seats they represent are in Quebec and in Ontario. He has, Stephen McKinnon was also someone who's talked about, maybe running for the leadership, but decided in the time he had available, he couldn't build a machine, couldn't get the money, so decided to sit it out, back to Mark Carney, and today you're seeing him being entrusted with the Minister of Jobs and Families.
David Joseph McGuinty, Ministre de la
Honourable
Sécurité
David
publique
Joseph
et de la
McGuinty,
Protection civile. The Honourable
Minister
David
of
Joseph
Public
McGuinty,
Safety.
Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness.
David McGuinty keeping his first cabinet job. This is the first time he's ever been in cabinet as Minister of Public Safety. He retains that position, given that he has also in a key function right now, given Donald Trump's threats.
I, David Joseph McGuinty, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness.
I, David Joseph McGuinty, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and the trusts reposed in me as Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. Thank you very much.
I would say that this cabinet, and you don't have to agree with me, David, but I would suggest that there's sort of two tiers, right? There's a tier that is about a focused cabinet on a critical issue at a time of an existential threat against the country, and then there's a part of the cabinet, and David McGuinty would be part of that first part, a part of the cabinet that is there to either make sure some key people have jobs or deal with some portfolios that are of lesser importance in this particular moment anyway.
But also, the need to have continuity in a portfolio like this, when you're dealing with the border, you're dealing with fentanyl, you've appointed a fentanyl czar, David McGuinty. I also think this maybe suggests that Mark Carney's not going to run on Ottawa South, which again was one of the other rumors is David McGuinty's seat. You want him to maintain that relationship with Borders Are Home and keep the momentum on those issues there.
And Climate Change. Now, Terry Duguid,
Right, Terry Duguid, also interesting because he is, I believe, still campaign co-chair, although there's no other co-part, I don't think yet, because the other co-chair stepped down, but he becomes the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Yeah, he was Minister of Sport.
Do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
I, Terry Gordon Duguid, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Okay, and Minister Dogood, Minister from Manitoba, stepping into a portfolio that is important personally to Mark Carney. He spent much of his life working on climate change files. Of course, again, this is a what we are calling really a transition cabinet. So how much Minister Dogood gets to do on this file, I don't know.
Well, it's interesting, too, though. You look at Minister Dogood, Manitoba, your home province, Jonathan Wilkinson, British Columbia, 2 cabinet ministers west of Thunder Bay.
Yeah.
Right? This is the regional, there are 2 ministers in New Brunswick. Dominic Alban and Jeanette Pettit-Taylor. There are 2 ministers for all of Western Canada, even with 2 seats in Alberta, though challenges around both, and multiple seats in British Columbia, though with people not seeking re-election.
Yeah. Just a similar situation in Manitoba, too, right?
Smith, Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
The Honourable Nathaniel Erskine Smith, Minister of Housing, Infrastructure.
So I believe that, so this is some additional pieces, I believe, for Nate Erskine-Smith. Communities and infrastructure, I don't think he had that before. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, he had housing, infrastructure, and communities. He basically, they swapped out Sean Fraser for him. Sean Fraser decided he was leaving.
Promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Housing, Infrastructure, and Communities.
And interesting here because he also had decided he wasn't going to run.
Yeah.
Then he was offered
this job.
He was offered the job by Justin Trudeau, decided he would do it because he is quite passionate about the issue of housing and thought he could make a difference. And he did get some stuff done very quickly in the dying days of that government. But staying in this role with Prime Minister Carney.
And what's interesting to watch with Nate Erskine-Smith, Rosie, is he had decided not to run and was going to leave federal politics. He was enticed with the cabinet post to stay on, and then an Ontario election happened. He came second to Bonnie Crombie in the leadership for the Ontario Liberal Party. She didn't do as great as people hoped. She'll have a leadership review. Depending on the federal election, what does the future hold for Nate Erskine-Smith?
Rachel Bendayan,
The Honourable
Minister
Rachel Bendayan, Minister of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship.
Okay, Rachel Bendayan, a Montreal MP, becoming Minister of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship. I would view this as a promotion. And she's taking over from Mark Miller, who is left out of cabinet, another close friend of Justin Trudeau's. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Rachel Bendayan, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship.
I, Rachel Bendayan, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship. Thank you.
Yeah, Rosie, Rachel Bendayan was Minister of Official Languages and Associate Minister of Public Safety, right? Immigration is a very important economic portfolio. Its issues in that file under the Liberals have contributed to the affordability and the housing crisis by letting too many people in. It's led to instability in the post-secondary, sector at the provincial level, largely because of a lot of colleges springing up and then being fed by federal approvals. But it's also an issue with the Canada-U.S. relationship, right? With people crossing the border, as the president defines it. Immigration is a core part of dealing with some of those challenges. We saw Mark Miller taking steps with David McGuinty, but former Minister Miller now back to the backbench.
Interesting, too, that it remains a portfolio with a Quebec minister, because Quebec also has its own abilities, rights, when it comes to immigration. So good to put someone there that would understand the complexities in that relationship as well. Okay, here is Elizabeth Briere, Minister of Veterans Affairs and Minister responsible for the Canada Revenue Agency. Those are 2 ones that's a big portfolio there as well.
I solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Veterans Affairs and Minister responsible for the Canada Revenue Agency.
I, Elisabeth Brière, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Veterans Affairs and Minister responsible for the Canada Revenue Agency.
Mel helpfully reminds me that the last time she was sworn in, she didn't have a voice, so we didn't. She was Minister of National Revenue, and now she takes on Minister of Veterans Affairs.
Well, she's National Revenue and Veterans Affairs, which there's no natural overlap here, right?
Well, services to people, I guess.
Well, perhaps, but you know,
I'm stretching. I realize.
Yeah, filing taxes, collecting tax revenue, cracking down on tax cheats, and then supporting people who retire from the Canadian Armed Forces.
Yeah.
I mean, there's, you're right on the service delivery thing, but there is no clear, obvious vertical integration that I see. No. But, this is what happens when you want a leaner cabinet, right? And you need to make some choices because these are things that need function.
It also then speaks, though, to the amount of time that you would be expected to do that.
Minister of Fisheries, Oceans, and the Canadian Coast Guard.
Very long, given
Honorable Joanne Thompson, Minister of Pestes.
Here's Joanne Thompson, who I didn't know before, but you knew, because she is a minister from Newfoundland and Labrador.
Yeah, she was Minister of Seniors. Now she's either being rewarded or punished with fisheries. It depends on how the season goes.
Thompson, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Fisheries, Oceans, and the Canadian Coast Guard.
This is sort of interesting, though, because I've talked a number of times with the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, as have you, Andrew Furey, about some of the challenges around Donald Trump and the fisheries. And so it's kind of interesting to put someone who would know about that in that position beyond just the market challenges.
Well, look, I think they've had an issue with fisheries on the East Coast. And I saw that when I was in Nova Scotia for the election. There's all kinds of problems with the lobster fishery in South Shore of Nova Scotia, with organized crime and other things coming in there. And the challenge with Minister Lebetelier, and I'm not disrespecting her ability, but she did not speak English. And I'm not saying that should disqualify you from serving in cabinet, but
it was just hard
part of being a fisheries minister in the Atlantic is you got to be able to go to the wharf and talk to them and talk them down when things are going bad. You kind of have to look at fisheries in the Atlantic the way you look at heritage in Quebec politically, and it was a challenge with Lebetelier there.
Okay, we're now going to get the three people who did not have cabinet roles before, starting with Ariel Kayabaga, who becomes leader of the government in the House of Commons and Minister of Democratic Institutions. A big promotion for her today.
I, Ariel Kayabaga, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, King of Canada, his heirs and successors.
I, Ariel Kayabaga, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, King of Canada, his heirs and successors.
I, Ariel Kayabaga, do solemnly and sincerely swear that I shall be a true and faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III as a member of His Majesty Privy Council for Canada, and I will in all things be treated, debated, and resolved in Privy Council faithfully, honestly, and I truly declare my mind and opinion. I shall keep secret all matters committed and revealed to me in this capacity, or that I shall be secretly treated in council. Generally, in all things, I shall be a faithful and true servant out to do for His Majesty.
I, Ariel Kayabaga, do solemnly and sincerely swear that I shall be a true and faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III as a member of His Majesty's Privy Council for Canada. I will in all things to be treated, debated, and resolved in Privy Council, faithfully, honestly, and truly declare my mind and my opinion. I shall keep secret all matters committed and revealed to me in this capacity, or that shall be secretly treated of in Council. Generally, in all things, I shall do as a faithful and true servant ought to do for His Majesty.
I, Ariel Kayabaga, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully and to the best of my skill and knowledge execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as the leader of government in the House of Commons and a minister of democratic institutions.
I, Ariel Kayabaga, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons and Minister of Democratic Institutions.
All right, when you are new to cabinet, you have to do a whole bunch of oaths, and so that's what Ariel Kayabaga did there. She's 34, and she's a refugee. She came to this country as a refugee when she was young, fleeing the civil war in Burundi.
Yeah, she's a London West MP. She was elected in 2021. She had political experience before that, having been elected to London City Council at age 27. I was going to say, that's not so long ago, considering it's only 7 years ago. Now she's a federal cabinet minister. She is the government leader in the House at a time when the House is prorogued and we're going to be going to an election. So it's unclear exactly how that's going to function and whether that endures beyond, whatever happens in the election, and should Mark Carney and his party win. But she was the first black woman to get elected to London City Council at 27, and now joining the federal cabinet.
Was a supporter of Mark Carney's, which isn't very surprising given most of caucus supported Mark Carney, but something to note as well. Next person up, same age, Greg McEachern tells me. Cody Blois, Minister of Agriculture.
Rural Economic Development. Cody Blois, Minister
also
of
34, strong voice for the Atlantic region, and coming into cabinet for the first time himself. Lots of cheering there from maybe his family's there to applaud him on. We'll see.
I, Cody Douglas Blois, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, King of Canada, his heirs and successors. I, Cody Blois, do solemnly and sincerely swear that I shall be a true and faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III as a member of His Majesty's Privy Council for Canada. I will in all things be treated, debated, and resolved in Privy Council, faithfully, honestly, and truly declare my mind and my opinion. I shall keep secret all matters committed and revealed to me in this capacity, or that shall be secretly treated of in council. Generally, in all things, I shall do as a faithful and true servant ought to do for His Majesty. I, Cody Douglas Blois, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trust reposed in me as Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food and Rural Economic Development.
All right. Cody Blois coming into cabinet for the first time. What message does that send, do you think, David?
Well, it's interesting with Cody Blois. He was a former chair of the Atlantic Caucus and was tasked with the duty of writing the letters on behalf of the Atlantic MPs who were the early adopters on the Trudeau Must Go movement inside the Liberal Party. He's also one of the carbon tax skeptics, I would say. The carve-out for home heating oil, which was a national carve-out, was fueled primarily by the distaste for it in the Atlantic provinces. And those MPs were core in driving it, and Cody Blois was front and center on that. He also was the only Liberal MP to support an opposition motion on Bill C-234, which sought to amend the Carbon Tax Act to exempt natural gas and propane used by farmers to dry grain and heat burns. So he has been against a lot of the core components of the Trudeau carbon policy that are more in alignment now as the Agriculture Minister with the Carney carbon policy.
I'm just going to note another style thing here, if we can, as we're considering the new Prime Minister. The former Prime Minister would have hugged every one of those people. Mark Carney, it's a handshake. You stand beside me. I'm not throwing my arm around you. This is business, and let's get on with it.
I, Ali Cyrus Assassi, do declare that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, King of Canada, his heirs and successors. I, Ali Cyrus Assassi, do solemnly and sincerely swear that I shall be a true and faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III as a member of His Majesty's Privy Council for Canada. I will, in all things to be treated, debated, and resolved in Privy Council, faithfully, honestly, and truly declare my mind and my opinion. I shall keep secret all matters committed and revealed to me in this capacity, or that shall be secretly treated of in Council. Generally, in all things, I shall do as a faithful and true servant ought to do for His Majesty. I, Ali Cyrus Assassi, do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Minister of Government Transformation, Public Services, and Procurement.
All right. Ali El-Sassi becoming a new minister too in a department that is also new, or at least a bunch of things put together. Kind of unclear what Minister of Government Transformation is, but I guess we'll find out.
Well, we did have in the old cabinet, Terry Beach was the Minister of Citizen Services, and this was about reforming the public-facing, passport applications, how you get things through, online forms and portals when dealing with the government. It's that sort of daily interaction of things. That could be part of it. Carney, the Prime Minister, which is the mental transformation we all have to do now. He has talked about using artificial intelligence, for example, to make government more efficient and more productive. You can see that fitting into a position like this, where the transformation of public services component and then procurement, that's the sticky part, right? That's the buying of things, the big purchasing of things, and that's where there's always challenges within government.
And that completes the swearing in of Prime Minister Carney's first cabinet, with the exception of Melanie Joly.
The Privy Council will now sign the oath books to formally witness the swearing in of these ministers.
Melanie Joly will be sworn in a bit later, but that is Prime Minister Carney's first cabinet. We'll see whether he gets a shot at making another one, but this is the cabinet that is to take him, to take this country through a challenging time, and to take him and the Liberals through an election that is going to happen in a matter of days. I'll welcome back our panelists as well now. Mel Richer, Greg McEachern, Fred Delory, and CBC's senior writer Aaron Wherry also joining us. Aaron, just because you are joining us, what's your first take on what you've seen here today?
I mean, I think Fred said earlier, this is a TV show, not just this, but the cabinet ceremony itself. And I do think in terms of ceremony and style, you took the hug observation from me.
Oh, sorry.
It is a lot of handshakes and not hugs. There wasn't the starry kind of eyed walk down the driveway. You can, the Conservative argument will surely be that this is still essentially Justin Trudeau's cabinet. It is interesting that there aren't, there had been sort of lots of speculation and rumors that we might see some people who aren't even MPs yet sworn into cabinet today. We didn't see any of that, but there have been some pretty big moves to distance this cabinet from the previous one. First of all, Stephen Guilbeault out of climate change, arguably the most prominent, well-known environmental activist in Canada. Obviously associated with the carbon tax, is now no longer in that file. Chrystia Freeland, who had been obviously Deputy Prime Minister, Finance Minister, so integral to the Trudeau government, is in transport, which I don't want to say is a minor file, but is not a prominent
We've been
file.
calling it a demotion. We feel
I think you can fairly say it's a demotion. So I think this is probably as much differentiation as Mark Carney could get away with today. I think it remains to be seen, if he is able to form government after the next election, how much more different he's willing to go and be with maybe more MPs or different MPs to work with.
Yeah.
The Registrar General, please.
This is always my favorite part, when the Minister of Innovation gets the Great Seal. So you can, it's just a silly thing, but I think it's kind of fun.
There are many little idiosyncrasies.
Yes, that's one of them.
To the Westminster parliamentary tradition, like for the fact that all of the ministers had to redo the oaths with Trudeau stepping down and Carney coming in, that the Chief Justice stepped in for that intervening period of time as the acting Prime Minister. So there's a lot of things that protocol officials and bureaucrats and Privy Council and Rideau Hall staff are doing behind the scenes today that we have no idea of in the public-facing part of this.
Closing words.
Once this wraps up, just to give viewers a sense, we will hear from Mark Carney. I'm not sure if any ministers are going to speak, but Mark Carney certainly. Prime Minister Carney, that you have to just do a little reset in your head. Prime Minister Carney will take some some questions from people, and then they will proceed to their first cabinet meeting as a new cabinet.
We'll close with a prayer of gratitude. We thank you, Creator, for this day and for the democratic processes that have provided us with strong leadership, a new Prime Minister, and a new cabinet. We acknowledge and express gratitude for Canada and the Canadian values that sustain all of us, that provide us with freedoms within these values to help us become our best selves. We acknowledge and express gratitude for the Indigenous peoples of Canada who have always been the caretakers and protectors of our lands and waters, and who, generation after generation, have welcomed newcomers to their territories and provided them with a place of safety, security, and peace. We acknowledge and express gratitude for the ongoing commitment of Canadians to one another, to provide each other with necessities in times of need, for our commitment to education, social supports, and health services for everyone. We thank you also for the inclusivity of our cultural mosaic and our ongoing commitment to fight racism and discrimination wherever we find it. We acknowledge and express gratitude for our children, our families, and communities. We thank you for all of those who work tirelessly to ensure that our borders, our waters, and lands are healthy, protected, and that we are safe. We thank you for those who work tirelessly in the areas of climate change and climate change adaptation. As we welcome a new Prime Minister and a new cabinet, we ask that you guide their steps and those of all of us in the days ahead as we work for the well-being of Canada and Canadians and for the well-being of our lands, waters, and the living beings living with us here on these, their traditional territories. We ask that our circle be strong, that our nation be healthy, strong, safe, and secure. Chimigwich for all that you have given us. Marcy.
Okay, this ceremony wrapping up here as Prime Minister Carney makes his mark on cabinet within the limitations and the restrictions of working with what he had. We should point that out, right? This is not. This is still Justin Trudeau's people. They are the people that were elected as part of Team Trudeau, and so he had to work within those parameters. And for some people, that will be great news in terms of stability, and for others, that will be a point of contention. I imagine Pierre Poilievre will make similar points when he comes out at 2 to speak to Canadians and give his reaction to this.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here today. Will you please rise if you are able to join Michael Carney in singing of the national anthem today? And following the anthem, please remain at your places for the departure of Their Excellencies, the Prime Minister, and members of the 30th Canadian Ministry.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits, et ta valeur de foi trempée protégera nos foyers et nos droits, protégera nos foyers et nos droits.
All right, the national anthem appreciated by Canadians always, and now more than ever, perhaps, as we've seen at various sporting events and even here at this first cabinet by Prime Minister Carney. As they make their way out, we're told that the Prime Minister will take questions from reporters, ministers will not, and that'll happen in a short period of time. They'll go into the other chambers there and talk with their family and friends about a historic moment for many of them. David.
Look, there is a lot of change happening today. You know, a new prime minister, a reshuffled cabinet, and a new signal on priorities. The pushback already from the Conservatives is that 87% of this cabinet were Trudeau cabinet ministers and 100% of them were Trudeau MPs. Yeah. Which I don't know if that's an endorsement of putting unelected people or maybe senators into the cabinet. I'm not sure what else you do in that circumstance. Yeah. The real change is going to come in messaging, in narrative, in priorities, in tone, in substance, and in style, and how you approach those things. And that's what they will have to eventually offer Canadians, you know, when they decide to have a return visit to Rideau Hall, ask for the dissolution of Parliament, and start the election campaign. I mean, if you look at the timeline under the election law as it is, if Parliament doesn't come back on the 24th, that means you have to dissolve by the 23rd of March, which means April 28th is your earliest election date. An issue with that, I'm told, is that the weekend before, when the early voting would be happening, would be the Easter weekend. Might not want to do that. So then May 5th becomes the next Monday. But April 28th, May 5th, that looks like the ballpark for when and if there's going to be an election. Yeah.
Just going back to counter my own point about whether this is change or not, I think if you look through the portfolios and the departments, you see that there are signals here about what is important at this moment. You know, someone texted me, there's no minister in charge of women's issues, right? Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean that those issues won't get dealt with, but that does send a signal about the moment we're in and what Prime Minister Carney wants to see as taking hold right now. And maybe that's just because it's just a transition cabinet, really. But other people will point at it and say, I don't know if this reflects what I would like.
Mm-hmm. And a few things.
Yeah.
The first two things I noticed was exactly that, women and gender equality gone, and labor not present. Those are the two things that jumped up at me.
Jobs is there, not
jobs. Yeah. So we'll have to see.
But there used to be employment development, right? So I'm assuming that's also jobs. So the words that they're using, the other word that I found interesting was moving from Canadian heritage to Canadian culture and identity. What does that mean? What's the wordplay that we're seeing there? And what message are we going to be receiving out of that? I think for some folks, the removal of those words will be important, actually, and probably won't be taken kindly. And I think it'll matter how we're talking about those things in the days to come and going into an election to see if there's a course correct there or how they're going to be talking about it differently. But yeah, those are definitely the first things that jumped at me. What's not included? Where could it be included? Mm-hmm. And who's going to be championing these issues if they're absent, because they're still really important. Yeah,
it doesn't mean that they're not in some of inside some of these departments, but it does send a signal when you don't have a minister in charge of a thing. Yep. And obviously you can't do that when you're squashing the whole thing down to 24, Greg. But that is also part of what is allowing Prime Minister Carney to put his stamp on this and show that this is not the same priorities as Justin Trudeau. This is something different at a different time.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the portfolio that Minister Freeland has, internal trade added to it. We know Premier Holt, Premier Houston, other premiers have been talking about this. And David, you've said numerous times, I've been around the table for this topic for years and years, where it's never dealt with in Canada, but this kind of seems like a moment. From my count, it looks like there's only about 7 ministers that were ministers when Justin Trudeau came in. You look at a guy like Bill Blair. Bill Blair didn't make cabinet right away. No. I don't think he got in until about 2018. You also look at some of those people like Nathaniel Erskine Smith or Steve McKinnon. They've been in cabinet, David McKenty, not for very long. So yes, obviously they picked from caucus, so they are Liberal MPs. Sure. And some of them were Liberal cabinet ministers before, but some of them, in terms of the base of the party, in terms of the caucus, they are fresh. And I know there's some names on here that were very vocal in caucus, telling the former prime minister, telling his PMO of what was happening long before the polls started to reflect it. And I think that will also send a message to caucus.
Beyond the big names, finance, foreign affairs, trade, innovation. What does it matter to make a cabinet that's going to last for 2 weeks? You know, yes, there have to be people functioning in the jobs, government has to run, services have to be delivered, but what is the exercise beyond that, given that there are a handful of people going to be dealing with the biggest challenge in the country right now, and the rest of them, Rechi Valdez, isn't really going to be doing anything as chief government whip.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, you need to have these positions as sort of like the table stakes for forming a government and becoming a prime minister. You need to have a cabinet. You need to have these perspectives internally. There is not enough time with the runway that we expect that this government has before you go to an election. But, a lot of the things that have disappeared from the nameplates, right, while still in the function of government, they're all totally overshadowed by the dominant issue right now. Like there's really one big issue, and it's Trump. And that's it. And a whole bunch of other things flow from that. And that's what this is meant to counter. So in terms of a continuity on the people in those jobs that are dealing with the border, dealing with the economy, dealing with the relationship, dealing with defense, that is a signal there that we're not changing for change's sake there. You want that continuity of those relationships, even though Dom LeBlanc will move from finance. He's still probably going to text with Howard Lutnick probably every day. You know what I mean? I would say Minister Champagne will also, maybe it'll be a group text. I'm not sure. But that focus needs to continue because it's the only thing right now that most people care about. It's completely changed the political environment in the country. This is the election cabinet. This is an election cabinet with a chance versus the one that Justin Trudeau swore in on December 20th, right? Like the polling gap was nearly 30 points by Christmas Day. Now it's down to the margin of error in practically every major national poll. New numbers from Abacus today has it a 4-point gap. So things have changed dramatically because of the environment, the circumstances, and the Canadian priorities. They've changed dramatically with a former central banker replacing Justin Trudeau. And we'll see if they change dramatically again in the election or if Canadians vote for, a measure of continuity with a panache of change, certainly in the Prime Minister's office and the direction of it.
Yeah, just to go back to the issue of departments or things that were there and that aren't there. We mentioned women and gender equality and youth. There was a minister responsible for diversity, inclusion, and persons with disabilities. There was citizen services. There was mental health and addictions. There was families, children, and social development. I wonder, Fred, whether that should concern Conservatives a little bit, because it does seem to be pulling away from the very progressive agenda of Justin Trudeau to some extent. And whether that is, it might be good news for the NDP if they can take the opportunity, but I wonder whether that would be concerning for Conservatives.
Depends how you look at it. If you look at having a minister as if it's actually a real thing they're doing, or is it just a signal? Was it just a signal under the Trudeau government? Now you actually have powerful ministers with all of these issues that could push these files actually harder and probably can get more done if they wanted to. So I don't know if it's an actual shift. Stephen Guilbeault, though, we talked earlier about him being promoted. Like, it's actually a huge promotion. He's the Quebec lieutenant. That is the de facto deputy prime minister. It's only been Quebec-based MPs who are prime ministers who've had deputy prime ministers in this country. So typically, when it's an English or non-Quebec prime minister, you have a Quebec lieutenant. This guy is anti-pipeline, anti-oil and gas, pro-carbon tax, and I know they're tinkering and coming up with a new carbon tax that is just going to be hidden, but we'll still be paying it in some way. I don't know how right now we're supposed to be finding more ways to get our products to market. I'm not sure how we're going to be doing that with a guy that powerful now at the cabinet.
Well, first of all, for the carbon tax, I do think we're going to see some action today on the carbon tax, the consumer carbon tax, which Mark Carney also said that he would ditch. I don't know that we know the answer about whether what he is going to do is going to be passed on to Canadian consumers. To be fair, it's possible, but I don't know that we know that answer yet. But I take your point about Mr. Guilbeault having a big promotion here. Greg has just helpfully sent us some of the cabinet committees, and I will just point out that there's a cabinet committee on Canada-U.S. relations and national security. The chair of that committee is Prime Minister Carney, with vice chair being Dominic LeBlanc. And then you can really see some of the important players in all of this, whether it's Anita Anand, Rachel Bendayan, Bill Blair, François-Philippe Champagne, Melanie Joly, and others. But those are the sort of the sub-cabinet committees that deal with some of the big issues, and they make make decisions or get advice and pass it along to cabinet in order to make decisions. We're waiting to hear from Prime Minister Carney, but there are people who have gathered outside of Rideau Hall on this historic day. That does happen, not usually when it's chilly out, but it happens. CBC's Ashley Burke has been speaking to some of them. Ashley.
Yeah, it's actually a beautiful day here, and there's about 50 people that have come to witness this moment in history. Some of them want to meet Mr. Carney themselves. Others are kind of mixed. They're just curious about what's unfolding and the election coming up. They've got a lot of questions. We've been speaking to people in the crowd. I'm going to let you meet a couple of them. Jose is the first. Tell me why you decided to come today.
Well, I woke up this morning with the idea to meet the leader of my country, and because I love Canada and I have been here 20 winters, I decided to walk to Rideau Hall. And here we are. It's a great place, and we're still living in this beautiful land that we can meet your Prime Minister the day this is inaugurated.
And the last time you did this was almost more than 9 years ago when Justin Trudeau was here.
I wanted to repeat the same story, and I see that 10 years later we can still do the same. That is great.
Robert, you have more mixed feelings about Mr. Carney as Prime Minister.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not exactly a supporter of his, but I want him to do well, right? With any Prime Minister, I want him to do well for our country. I understand he has a background in finance, and, you know, his realm is of spreadsheets and graphs and things, but I don't know how well that's going to fare against tweets and threats from the United States. But, you know, I wish him the best, even though maybe I wouldn't have been someone to vote for him.
You're still undecided on who you're going to vote for in the next election.
Yeah, I mean, I support the Conservatives much more. Mr. Poilievre is my member of Parliament. I like him as my member of Parliament. I see some warning signs with him as leader, things that I don't like so much, but we'll see. I'm fairly undecided.
And France, you're a veteran who decided to come here today. What is your message to Mr. Carney on day one as Prime Minister?
I want him to stay strong, really. And as a veteran, we're going to stand on guard with him. Stay strong for our country.
So there's a couple of people that are here in the crowd. There are university students, there are new Canadians, a whole bunch of people who are lining up to maybe see if they can get a photo with him, meet him for the first time, or share their message about what they want to see from him as Prime Minister. Rosie.
Interesting. Nice to see people engaged in the process. Thank you, Ashley. We'll come back to you. Of course, we are standing by for Prime Minister Carney to come out of Rideau Hall and take some questions with his newly formed cabinet. I'm going to go back to Aaron now because we've only heard from you a little bit. Talk to me about the challenge of what he had to do today, which is to have stability that will reassure Canadians, like that lady there, to deal with Donald Trump, show change from Justin Trudeau, put your mark on something, you know, as the new Prime Minister. It's not easy to build cabinets, and I don't think it's easy to meet all of those bars either.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the first thing you'd wonder about is how many people are going to be upset that they're not in cabinet or upset that their preferred person isn't in cabinet. Yeah. Someone like Karina Gould, who has, you know, let's not overstate things. She got 3.2% in the leadership race, but does have supporters. Are people going to be upset, or are people going to look at this and say, Mark Carney gives us the best chance of winning, and so let's maybe table the complaints until afterwards? Mm-hmm. You know, I think he is. It looks like he's tried to make some changes, or as much change as he could, without completely overturning cabinet. I think if you assume that the team of sort of LeBlanc, Champagne, Joly were sort of untouchable, given the current circumstances with the United States, there's only so much he could do without bringing, and again, if he's not bringing in people from outside of Parliament, people who aren't MPs, into cabinet. Again, he's working with sort of a pretty limited amount of movement he can actually achieve. I think it will come down now to sort of some of those signals. You know, if they move within cabinet to get rid of the carbon tax, for instance, if they do things like that. I think on the flip side of that, you know, and Mel was talking about this a bit earlier, is have they opened up a bit of a flank here for the NDP to say, oh, you don't care about women anymore, you don't care about diversity anymore. The Liberals
Except there are women and diverse women in cabinet,
right.
So that would be my answer
but
to
the idea that you've taken those jobs off the table, assuming that they were there for a reason in the first place, have you opened yourselves up? They'll probably have to. I mean, I assume they will probably have to try to answer those with policy and platform commitments.
Yeah, that's right.
But those are the sorts of arguments you open yourself up to when you start playing with the cabinet roster.
Mm-hmm. You want to weigh in there?
Yeah, and I would just say, like, the addition, agreed with everything that you've said, and important things that folks are looking for their new prime minister to speak about. And again, I know I mentioned labor earlier, but in a time where our jobs are under threat, and I understand the difference between jobs and labor, but I do think that there's a massive role for labor to play as part of this conversation. So that is also, what does that mean that you're dropping that? I think is also something that I'd be paying attention to.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm curious when Mark Carney comes out, the types of questions he gets, because I have written down 4 or 5 questions that I would like to ask the new Prime Minister. How has this changed when so many people are the same? Why are PEI and Alberta left out of the Team Canada cabinet? Why are there only 2 ministers west of Thunder Bay? There are 14 British Columbia MPs in the Liberal caucus. There is 1 cabinet minister. I know 4 of them aren't running, but you have Randeep Sarai, you have Terry Beach, you have Talib Noor Mohammed, organizers and fundraisers. So the regional priority and representation in this cabinet. And will you meet the House or will you meet the electorate? You know, those are, and one might lead to the other, presumably on things. But you know, those are the big bottom line questions. I think I've already had people emailing me from Prince Edward Island saying we're left out. What's going on? Alberta always feels that way when it's a Liberal government, but it's acute when there are options in the caucus who don't get picked for cabinet. So it's curious to see that, and you know, whether he's asked these things, because I'm not going to be there. I don't get to ask these questions.
Hopefully he's not watching, because then he would be prepped for all these smart questions you're going to send to Ashley.
These are the things I'm watching for and what he is going to say, because they're big questions that jump out of this, right? Like, how are you going to deal with Donald Trump, the Canada-U.S. relationship? That is also very situational and changes from day to day, depending on what changes with the U.S. from day to day. But sort of like the signals he has sent internally and externally with these choices and to different regions of the country. You know, we focus a lot on Ontario and Quebec as Liberal power bases, you know, the GTA in particular. But Atlantic Canada has been a steady pillar through 3 elections that's gotten really wobbly over the last little while. I don't know what this does to the PEI component of the Atlantic region.
And those are certainly all very, very good questions. And really, that's why this is kind of the first test as Prime Minister. What message are you sending with this? Did you hit the right mark? Did you upset people? Let's talk a little bit about, as we wait for the Prime Minister to come out, let's talk a little bit about the political situation we find ourselves in terms of the polling. Eric Grenier from the writ.ca uses our poll tracker, does the poll tracker for us, and updates it now pretty regularly because things are moving very quickly. So let me show you what the latest is. This is, of course, polls that are aggregated by Eric Grenier for us. And you can see there that a Mark Carney Liberal-led government has picked up steam, and the Conservative Party under Pierre Poilievre has gone down. The drop of the NDP is startling. So if there's anything that they can take away from this cabinet today, they should probably do that, because they're in some deep, deep trouble there. And there it gives you a sense of where we are with the Bloc Québécois, the Green Party, the People's Party. Bloc Québécois in some trouble in Quebec. And as we've been talking about, Quebec really is the road to victory for the Liberal Party of Canada.
And Rosie, we should point out the change margins on that poll tracker are from the last update of the poll tracker.
That's right.
Not, you know, they look very small there, but like you go back to January 6th, you go back to December 16th, the change is more profound, if not seismic, right? And that
double digits, really.
Yeah, the NDP was ahead of the Liberals at one point, right?
Yeah.
And sorry, Mel, I see her flinch every time I mention this.
It's not a personal affront.
I am just stating a fact.
20% for like a full year. Let me just make that super clear.
I get you, but like down to like
a day.
13, 14 now is the challenge, right?
Yeah.
And you know, as this election potentially becomes a very polarized binary choice.
Yeah.
You know, between Conservatives and Liberals, that threatens to squeeze the Bloc and threatens to squeeze the NDP in a big way.
And so because of those numbers, Greg, how much goodwill does Mark Carney have when we're talking about all the questions he needs to be asked? If just your name has brought you up to 10 points or whatever, well, it's 10 percentage points, I guess, 8 percentage points. Some polls show a tie between the Liberals and the Conservatives. If it has done that, surely you have maybe a little more leeway than most.
I think, you know, the Conservatives have served up a good lesson of what not to do. They were ahead for a long time. It seemed like they were getting a bit cocky and measuring the drapes, and we can see what happens. Thanks to your simultaneous translation, and parents, send your kids French immersion, don't be like me. I believe you translated roughly what Prime Minister Carney was saying is we have work to do.
Yep.
And in that I heard the echo of Jean Chrétien in '93. And that we have work to do, we have work to do. And on January 6th, the day that I believe is the day the Prime Minister resigned, Prime Minister Mark Carney met with Prime Minister Jean Chrétien for 2 hours that evening. They had a long talk about what Mr. Carney would do next and how he would approach it. And so I'm hearing the echoes of that. Just get down and do the work, as quick as you can.
Yeah, yeah. And so, what are you thinking when you hear that? That if you focus on the work that has to be done to defend the country, the skills you have to do it, that is a message that is resonating with Canadians right now.
It's how you communicate it. This is a brand new politician that has not really been through the ringer yet.
No.
The leadership race was a joke in the most liberal way to say so. There was no real race here. There was no opponent. He didn't do a lot of media. He didn't do a lot of scrubs.
Three interviews.
Right.
Three national interviews anyway.
Right?
Yeah,
and lots of in U.S. media.
Still 3 more than Pierre Poilievre has ever done.
Lots of press conferences.
Well, he's one more than he's done with me.
Pre-selecting the questioners, not allowing follow-ups. It's a press conference in name.
All right, here's the family photo. There's the family photo. We'll keep talking, Fred.
Okay, so he is a new politician who hasn't gone through this. It's going to be very hard, 36-day or 40-some-day campaign. Every day he's going to be in the ringer, and how he performs in that, it's going to be tested. And I have to keep, the polls, the tracker, Conservatives are only up by 8 points. That's still a massive majority. That's still a big number. And John Turner, at this stage, took the lead over Brian Mulroney, right? After the Mulroney was way ahead of Pierre Trudeau throughout the time. There's a honeymoon period. His numbers have gone up, and there's where Carney is right now. Carney's negatives have gone up 10 points in the last month, which is a big jump as the Conservatives are pounding him with ads right now. You can't turn on CBC without seeing them.
CBC?
Yeah.
I heard that Pierre Poilievre saying nobody watched CBC.
Heavy
the ones that do seem to be not a fan of Carney anymore.
They also feature my interview with Mark Carney prominently, so I get to know they're watching me there. I think that's true. There is momentum normally out of this kind of thing. You would expect it to tighten up. What I also would have expected, though, was a better strategic response from the Conservatives to Mark Carney. And I mean, you said it off the top there. You're not sure that they're there yet.
Yeah, they're still got to figure it out. What is the narrative? What is the message? And it's not just so much Carney, it's Trump.
That's right.
How are they responding to that, and what is the wording on that? The Canada First rally that he did, that Poilievre did, the visuals were great. A lot of the message, a lot of the points were very solid and really good. I just don't know the overarching, what is the narrative and the push.
But this is the big difference in the Campbell and Turner comparisons. Ronald Reagan and George Bush first were not existential threats to Canada, right? They were conventional Republican presidents. Like, that is all gone. So I get the sugar rush, the Kamala Harris comparisons, and all of these things that exist. But it's almost impossible to apply rational and historic political analysis to the intrusion of Donald Trump on whatever he may do over the next 6 to 8 weeks to affect things here.
Which makes an election campaign very challenging, especially for someone who hasn't been road tested. If you are constantly bombarded, your prime minister and you're campaigning on a ballot issue that you want to campaign on, Donald Trump, and that Canadians probably want too, and Donald Trump is constantly inserting himself into the election campaign, that's hard for any politician, let alone a rookie politician.
Yeah, but I think if I'm Pierre Poilievre, I don't want Donald Trump intervening in this election campaign, because every time he intervenes, it gives Mark Carney a chance to.
No, but that's what I mean. For Mark Carney, it's a challenge. Yeah.
What I think is, like, if you look at what Doug Ford did in Ontario, he basically ran against Donald Trump, and even though
ignored everybody else.
Even though he's the premier of Ontario and his ability to respond to Donald Trump is relatively limited, voters seem to be okay with it, and I think that is the factor that that makes it so hard to know how these next 6 weeks, if we assume we're going into an election, hard to predict. Because it is true that John Turner and Kim Campbell had leads and it was frittered away. And I think the John Turner example is very instructive because of why he frittered it away. It wasn't just that it was a sugar rush. It was that that party and that leader were not ready for a campaign, and they performed poorly. And that's what ultimately, cost them. They were up against a PC party that was much more well organized, much better funded, and that's, you can lose a campaign in 6 weeks, but it's just so hard to know where the electorate is at in terms of Donald Trump and how that is going to factor into things. And and what the argument is going to end up being. You know, I think the Conservative argument is, yes, we'll deal with Donald Trump, but let's remember, you know, all our complaints we have about the last 10 years. And I just don't know, that argument is going to run up against both Mark Carney trying to signal change and Mark Carney saying, I'm the guy to deal with Donald Trump. And I think that's where the friction is.
I mean, you know, Pierre Poilievre continues to say axe the tax. And I take your point, Fred, that we don't know exactly what is going to shake down with how Mark Carney, Prime Minister Carney, is going to approach carbon pricing. But he may very well axe the tax today. And then I don't know what you do when you're Pierre Poilievre. I would suggest you stop talking about it, but they don't seem to be doing that. They continue to talk about it as though it's something that everyone is talking about at home. And they're not. That's not what they're talking about anymore.
Right, it is something that is in front of us right now. Whatever they do, though, with the carbon tax, I don't think people will believe it's truly gone, because they've said they're repackaging it in some kind of industrial.
Well, they're not going to get a rebate if it's gone.
So
that you know, it's all gone. Yeah.
So yeah, look, it still clearly is a message that does resonate when it comes to affordability, and that's what they need to tie into. And that was one of the things they were very successful at, was making the carbon tax a part of affordability.
Totally.
And so they need to transition somehow.
Or find a way to make affordability and Donald Trump fit together or something. I'm not going to figure out their strategy for them, but yeah.
The consumer-facing carbon tax is what they've linked to affordability, and now they've shifted, you're going to hide it in an industrial policy. And I've repeatedly asked the Conservatives, are they going to have an industrial carbon tax?
Yes.
Are they going to charge massive emitting polluters, you know, for the emissions they put out as they accumulate vast amounts of wealth, to try to force them to clean up their production? And we're told, wait for the election, wait for the election. Well, you know, I mean, the question is, what are they going to do on this? We don't know. And on Trump, like, whether he intrudes or not, and yesterday I take from the meeting between Lutnick and Ford and Champagne and LeBlanc, it was a rhetorical reset. I think they want to sort of dial things down so they can have their transition, they can have their election, figure things out, get it back on a more normal thing. Whether he intrudes or not, he's there, right? It's impossible to ignore. He's the shadow looming over everything in the middle of this campaign. If we presume we go with the timelines we're anticipating, April 2nd is the reciprocal tariff deadline, right? And the pause comes off and everything else. So this is going to punctuate the campaign no matter what, the level of direct intrusion from Trump, because it's impossible for it to be ignored.
We are waiting for Prime Minister Carney there outside Rideau Hall to come and take some questions. He has just been sworn in as Prime Minister, if you're just tuning in, and he has just named his first cabinet. 11 women and 13 men. Many of them had been in roles in Justin Trudeau's cabinet. They see themselves in similar roles or slightly shifted, and a few new faces here as he prepares to govern for the first time. He also is holding a cabinet meeting at around 2 p.m. Eastern, if he sticks to this schedule anyway, where he will make some decisions for the first time as Prime Minister around that table, with a much slimmed down cabinet table compared to the previous Liberal government. And we should say that Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre will also be speaking this afternoon. He will be speaking at 2 p.m. Eastern, and we will bring that to you live as well. Ashley Burke is there outside of Rideau Hall and has more on how Prime Minister Carney is preparing for the days ahead. Ashley.
Yeah, Rosie, along with creating this cabinet, Mark Carney, the new prime minister, he's been on the phone talking to members of caucus to try and build that up. There's a lot of people who said they were publicly going to leave under Justin Trudeau, or that they were thinking about it because of how badly things were going in the polls. They kind of lost hope that things could be turned around for their party. And Mr. Carney, we've been told, has been on the phone talking to people, trying to convince them to stay. So Wayne Long is one of the people that I spoke to about this. He's the first MP that came out to publicly call on Justin Trudeau to resign. And he says that Mark Carney called him up and asked him, will you stay on my team? And convinced him that that was the right move. He's going to run again. Anita Anand, another minister that's now part of this cabinet, she's another one that said that she received a call from him and said, can you stay on? She also said that she got a lot of calls from Canadians and her constituents as well, asking her to stay. So he's trying to get some of those people that were hesitant or that just wanted to leave altogether and move on to the next chapter of their lives to stay on, so that he has a chance and that he has some of those seats filled quickly. They've got a lot of seats to fill. And as well, along with that, we've got some ministers that say they're now leaving, 8 in total. Mark Holland, the latest one yesterday, to announce that he won't be running again, the health minister at as of yesterday. I spoke to him after he made that announcement. He says that he was told yesterday he would not be in cabinet, but that he respects that decision, that things were moving in a different direction, that this aligns with him. He said that he also was, this job was kind of burning him out and many others, and that he wanted to be with his family. So he's one of those people that's going to be leaving. Now his seat in Toronto and Ajax will be open. Could that be one of the places that Mark Carney potentially runs in the next election? I just checked with a source not long ago who says that he still hasn't decided where he's going to be running when election time comes. Rosie?
Important point that Ashley made there is one of the reasons the Prime Minister was probably calling people to tell them to run again is incumbency is your first advantage when it comes to an election. An incumbent will win over a new person. And so if you're trying to hold seats, incumbents matter to that as well. But Ashley's quite right. The Liberals do not have, at this stage, enough candidates right across the country appointed or nominated. The Conservative Party leads that charge pretty easily. So if an election happens soon, Greg, maybe I'll bring you in here, that has to happen soon too. Now, whenever I talk about this, though, I also think, well, does it really matter how great your candidate is in, X riding in Saskatchewan or Alberta, because that's not a target pickup for you. So when a party is preparing for this sort of thing, are they trying to make sure they have the best names in the places where they have a chance or where there's a real fight? Is that how you do that when you're getting ready?
An example would be Minister Elizabeth Briere, who 2 elections ago won by less than 1,000 votes. And then in 21, I think it was around 5,000.
Yeah.
So if there's a big sweep, that tide's going out, incumbency doesn't really matter.
Right.
But it is in normal times, and I guess normal since 2000 is minority parliaments because we've had more minorities parliaments. So yeah, it is a real advantage. And in the case of Anita Anand, what Ashley is reporting, anecdotally I can tell you, 100% true. A lot of people were very disappointed to see Anita leave. I know when people said, oh, it's the polls, I was kind of surprised. But Anita brings a lot to the table in terms of her background, but also Liberals are very happy with her in terms of what she did for procurement during the pandemic, her work on cleaning up things at D&D. So there were people that were telling her directly. And I think it was a case of Mark Carney making it very clear to her that she was wanted.
Yeah, and that she would have a good job too, because that's part of how you negotiate these things. Talk to me though about how you make sure you get all your candidates in ridings and how important that is in these days leading up to an election.
For sure. I'll go back to the Ontario election a little bit.
Yes.
And there was a lot of talking about how the NDP was going to collapse in Ontario because of what the polling looked like. And there's often an emphasis on that, but what you should be focusing on is where can we win and how do we make sure that all our resources go to the places that actually win. So when you're talking about the importance of candidates, obviously filling a full slate is really important. But making sure in the places where you have a shot at winning, it's somebody that's got good ties to the community, that's somebody that would be a really good caucus member. And again, how can we set ourselves up so in the places where we have a chance to win, we also have a really good candidate. That is super important.
The Ontario election, Bonnie Crombie got 30% of the vote. She got more vote than Merritt Stiles NDP, but the NDP focused, on very specific areas, and they're the official opposition as a result, right?
So if you're doing that as the Liberal Party trailing behind with nominations, is that what you do? You say, okay, I'll star candidate, I'll put here, there's a good chance to win. This is a real fight with the Conservatives, I'll put someone good here. Is that how you approach those kinds of things? Because you've actually done that job. I have not.
Generally, star candidates don't exist, right? We presidentialize our elections no matter how we want to look at it. People are voting for Pierre Poilievre versus Mark Carney versus Jagmeet Singh.
Right.
And what you want are candidates who can amplify and push those messages, people that will knock on doors, that can build teams of volunteers and do it. Those are the type of candidates you want, and that's why the NDP were successful in holding a lot of those seats, because they did good constituency work, and then they had armies of people that can go and hit the doors and push the messages. You also, though, need to be very careful for those unheld, no-hope seats to make sure you put candidates in who aren't going to blow up your campaign, who are not vetted properly, and who end up going way off message and pushing out their own things, coming up with their own platforms. That's got to be a big concern for all parties, particularly when something's coming this quickly together.
Yes.
Particularly on the Liberal side.
Yeah.
Obviously, I hope you don't vet them too well, but I'm sure they will.
Yeah, I mean, and the Conservative advantage here is not only in candidates, and I know now we're doing the conversation around an election call special, and we're not there yet. We're still waiting for the Prime Minister.
This time next week.
That's right. Join us in a few days, but we're still waiting for the new Prime Minister of Canada. But the Conservative Party advantage is candidates nominated, fundraising dollars, a war room that's up and running, a leader who's been campaigning for months, who has an enormous amount of stamina in Pierre Poilievre, and that's what Prime Minister Carney is up against here.
Yeah, I would be interested to know how much prep and candidate recruitment they were doing even during the leadership race. I mean, I think Fred's right. You can overstate how much candidates matter. You think back to 2011 and the Orange Wave in Quebec.
Yep.
There were a lot of MPs that the NDP did not think were going to be MPs.
Really great.
Some of them did end up being.
Some of them did very well. Yeah. Some of them were names on a ballot who ended up being great MPs. Yeah. But you can't say that their victory was down to their local campaigning because they didn't do any.
No, they didn't.
But the flip side of that is, as Fred says, days will be spent on guess what this candidate posted on Twitter 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And if this campaign is close, which it could be if this election is close, those wasted days on the campaign trail and those little small margins in ridings could really matter. And so I think this really is a test of how well this Liberal Party can get itself together in days or weeks to be able to contest an election. Yes, they may be able to rustle up some candidates. They might be able to get away with it if this is a real wave election. But I would say it's just as likely that it's going to come down to some a few races, and whether or not they're able to pull some candidates together has a real potential to matter.
Yeah, David?
Yeah, I'm curious to see how the mechanics of this campaign, how they are conducted. What we saw with the Carney leadership, Fred and his fellow Conservatives have suddenly found a great respect for media access to people seeking higher office.
Important.
It's very important. I appreciate it. But he has run his campaign not in tone and in style, but in tactic, very similar to how Pierre Poilievre has operated. Very controlled events with minimal media access and heavy emphasis on digital and paid media, over more earned media, right? So I think that's the kind of thing we may very well see. I know there are no star candidates, but he may, in this moment, try to recruit people who would be, like, let's use Christy Clark. And I know she's a very polarizing figure in British Columbia,
Sure is, yeah.
but she's known, she's a name, she would have a resonance with some people, good and bad, but there's cabinet potential there, having a former first minister running for office. I mean, right now we see Champagne, the finance minister. LeBlanc was the finance minister. Who will Pierre Poilievre's finance minister be? Until very recently, a lot of people thought it might be Mike de Jong, who was seeking a nomination in British Columbia because he's a former BC finance minister. He's not allowed to run for the party for an undisclosed reason, presumably because he's carbon taxed de Jong. He raised the carbon tax multiple times in the BC government. But beyond the presidentialization, I think there'll start to be an increasing focus on team, because right now with the Conservatives, it is Pierre Poilievre, and that's it. And it lives and dies with his popularity. That second tier of people, like there's no Dom LeBlanc, there's no Champagne, there's no Joly in Quebec. Who are those people?
Well, I mean, those people may be there, but they just
we haven't seen them. They're not
featured.
highlighted, is what I'm saying. I'm not saying they don't exist.
No.
I don't think people know who they are.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We talk about that at issue a lot, that we don't really know who would form a cabinet. I don't know if people really sit around and think about that, though. I'm not sure.
I really do think the leader is massively important. It's who's communicating to people and how they're connecting with people. I think in this circumstance, though, Carney will have no choice but to lean in on some people, because we've been talking about him, but people don't actually know him. Yeah. He's not tested. You talk about really tight scrums. I was looking, I think earlier this week, he was in Hamilton, and there was comments about how B-roll needed to be turned off and he wouldn't answer questions. And a former colleague of mine texted me saying, doesn't his team know better? I said, do know better, and that's why, right?
We have some info on that.
Oh, okay.
That was at the request of the steel company.
Oh, okay,
the owners of the
fine.
steel, because we lost it.
Yeah.
Like, the press gallery does not take, you can't record this,
Right,
you
right,
can't,
right.
we
Of
do
course.
not agree with that.
Yeah.
But this was a request by the company with local media providing pool. It was different than how the National Press Gallery would operate, because you all know, we would,
Right,
no,
right,
we're
right.
not going to turn off our microphones, we're not going to turn off our cameras. It's
Right,
just not how it
fine.
operates.
Okay, so that's
But yes,
that's
but
an
they
important
should have
context,
intervened to
but
make
the-
sure that didn't happen, to
absolutely.
avoid it, right?
To me, if you're a good, if I'm doing my job as director of communications and I know my guy's not going to be that great on the floor, I'm going to not put him on the floor and have those situations filmed, right? And what we know in a campaign is that's the best thing about a campaign. It's not my guy standing, I keep saying my guy. Jimmy was my guy, so I my guy. But your leader, it's not the shots of him standing at a podium that change people's hearts and change people's minds. It's the shot of them in the crowd. It's the shot of them meeting with people. And we haven't seen that at Carney, right? We haven't really seen that outside of liberal events. So how does he do in those circumstances or in those situations? I think will be really important to see. And that's what I'm seeing. The lack of doing interviews, the lack of seeing that. To me, it's like, well, maybe he's not that great, and maybe that's why we're not seeing that.
I was told an anecdote from the Carney after party, after he won on Sunday. There was another party away from the location, and then a young woman went up to him and wanted a selfie. And he said, no. So opposite of Justin Trudeau, certainly, but also something that's the kind of thing that, goes viral and people share it, and it's super fun
It's
to
off
connect with
message,
people.
though. He's got to be the guy.
But that's my point. Yeah, if you're the guy who's going to take on Donald Trump and you're the serious person for the country, maybe doing a selfie is kind of a waste
no
of
hugs,
time.
no selfies.
No
Yeah,
hugs, no
and listen, I've had a couple emails from people as we're talking saying, stop talking about that. There's a serious time. We don't need to. But it is important to talk about tone in politics, because that is how you connect with people, and that is how you persuade people to vote for you.
Well, there's being tested in a scrum and tested in an interview, and the sales pitch from the Carney people is, and from his resume, is he was tested in the global financial crisis, he was tested in Brexit, right? He has been tested with things that truly have consequences beyond whether or not a sit down with Rosie or a sit down with me or, whoever goes well, right? So, I mean, that's the argument. We'll see. Like, in this moment in time, I wonder if looking at small little tactical things that often drive shows like the one I host every day, in which Fred and Greg and Mel will be on again later today, whether those matter as much as just the big moment the country is facing, the big, truly meaningful challenges that are on the table, and who can truly respond to that test. I wonder if that just drowns all the other stuff out, because that matters in a way that a national election kind of hasn't mattered.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
Yeah, for politicos like Fred, Mel, and I, those are indications or tells. On our last episode of David Cochran After Dark, which was the English debate on a Tuesday, I was sitting here and I watched the live feed of Mark Carney walking in to the debate, and he was riffing with reporters, he was chatting with supporters, and I saw that, and as a media advance guy, I immediately became much more confident and much less worried, because that seemed like somebody who was in control of it. The challenge might be for somebody like Prime Minister Carney is to know that has value, that telegraphs a lot, because it may seem inconsequential to you, a selfie or your ability to talk to total strangers and not be rattled. But in a campaign, all of a sudden a moment can be really amplified. So I do think he's got that skill set. I think that's a better skill set for him than standing behind a podium.
Okay, and speaking of podiums, that podium that you're looking at is just outside Rideau Hall, where Prime Minister Carney is expected soon, we hope, to come out and deliver remarks to Canadians on his first day on the job that he wanted and that he got by a huge, huge win at the Liberal leadership, which was just days ago. This transition has all happened at an accelerated speed, to say the very least. He will be joined by his cabinet, the 30th Ministry, made up of 11 women and 13 men. Some of the key players that you are familiar with staying inside cabinet and moving to important jobs. As Prime Minister Carney says, this is the time that the country needs serious management in the face of Donald Trump. So people like Dominic LeBlanc was finance minister, now moving to Minister of International Trade and Intergovernmental Affairs. François-Philippe Champagne was the Minister of Industry and Innovation, he becomes Canada's Finance Minister. Anita Anand becomes Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. And Melanie Joly, who's the Minister of Foreign Affairs, remains the Minister of Foreign Affairs. She'll be sworn in later today because she was off doing her job, meeting with other G7 foreign ministers. That door there opening as members of Cabinet come out. We are not expecting to hear from the Cabinet ministers themselves today. This is Prime Minister Carney's day, if you will, and he is here to deliver what his message is. In some ways, I think you could also view today as the unofficial kickoff of an election campaign, too, because this is his first political move as Prime Minister to send a signal to Canadians about what matters in this moment, what matters to him, and how he wants Canadians to think about him and what he's doing. So again, some familiar faces you see there. Chrystia Freeland, she of course was the runner-up in the leadership race. She is staying on in Cabinet. She has become the Minister of Transport and Internal Trade, which has taken on renewed importance in the time of Donald Trump as premiers from right across the country try to strike down internal trade barriers in order to create a one economy, as Prime Minister Carney likes to call it. So his cabinet now, it's 24 people in total, down significantly from the last one. And he will come out and answer some questions and speak. We also know that he is holding his first cabinet meeting with these people, his new ministers, at 2 p.m. Eastern, so that they can start discussing some of these issues that are so critical right now. And Prime Minister Carney, remember, is also taking his first international trip as Prime Minister, heading to Europe in the next number of days, where we have confirmed he will meet with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer. We don't know if he's meeting with Emmanuel Macron yet, the President of France, but that is likely in an attempt to shore up allies with this country, given the threats from Donald Trump and given some of the upending of the rules-based order in the world right now, whether it be in the face of this country or others. Ukraine comes to mind. Haven't had a lot of conversation or heard Prime Minister Carney on some of those issues, so it'll be interesting to hear him on those too. But the pressing questions today for the new Prime Minister will be about some of the choices he made in this cabinet, some of the regions or people left out, and undoubtedly the key question, how quickly will we find ourselves in an election campaign for a Prime Minister who has no seat. Seeking a mandate is of prime importance right now, particularly given the threat. David, I'll bring you in here as we wait for Prime Minister Carney to emerge from Rideau Hall.
Yeah, I want to know how quickly he's going to be back here because, we've got some laundry to do and some planning to do because the election campaign is, a minimum of 37 days up to a maximum of 51. And, all of these questions that we're sort of musing about and speaking about, they're going to be answered very soon, maybe after this 10-minute speech and a 20-minute Q&A.
Okay.
Here is Prime Minister Mark Carney.
Que la fête commence. Alors, bonjour tout le monde. Hello everyone. It is my honor to respond to the Governor General's request that I form a government. And it's a solemn duty to serve as Prime Minister at this time of great consequence for our country. The ceremony we just witnessed reflects the wonder of a country built on the bedrock of three peoples: Indigenous, French, and British. The opening and closing prayers evoke the original stewards of this land. They remind us of the deep roots from which we grow and underscore the values to which we aspire. The office of the Governor General links us through the Crown and across time to Canada's proud British heritage. Et la cérémonie s'est déroulée dans nos deux langues
the
officielles.
ceremony went ahead in both official languages, our bilingual identity, and the French language enriches our culture.
On these foundations, Canadians have built a dynamic nation that celebrates its diversity, that cares for the vulnerable in society, and that always strives for a better tomorrow. Ce nouveau cabinet
This new cabinet
est pleinement conscient
is fully confident with respect to our responsibility to strengthen the foundations of our nation in the midst of this crisis and to build a Canada that is even better. It is my pleasure to introduce the extraordinary and well-qualified team that will serve within my government and will defend the values we hold so dear. Our government will change the way it works and will focus on the most essential things and adopt an approach based on action to meet the challenges we currently face.
Canada's new government is changing how we work so we can deliver better results faster to all Canadians. We have new ministers with new ideas, ready to respond to new threats and to seize new opportunities. Canada's new government is focused on the things that matter most to Canadians: growing more higher-paying jobs, improving affordability, and making Canada more secure. Canada's new government will be action-oriented, driven by a smaller but highly experienced team made to meet the moment we are in. Our leaner cabinet will focus on two priorities in particular. First, protecting Canadian workers and their families in the face of unjustified foreign trade actions. And second, growing this great country by putting more money in Canadians' pockets, by ensuring that government spends less so Canada can invest more, by building millions of homes, by making Canada a superpower in both conventional and clean energies, by creating new trade corridors with reliable partners, and by forging one Canadian economy out of 13. We will relentlessly pursue this positive agenda because Canadians know that negativity isn't strength. They know that negativity won't pay the rent or the mortgage. The negativity won't bring down the price of groceries. Negativity won't win a trade war. We know that by building together, we can give ourselves far more than anyone else can take away. Nous sommes maîtres chez nous.
We are masters in our own home. Our country is Canada strong, and our country is united and strong. We will immediately begin with our first cabinet meetings.
Canada strong. Our government is united and strong, and we will immediately get to work with our first cabinet meeting as soon as I respond to a few of your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Merci, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Nous allons maintenant passer à une période de questions de 15 minutes. On va prendre une question suivie. We'll now do a 15-minute question period. One question, one follow-up. Merci.
Très bon Fillon de TVA. Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier ministre.
Good morning, Prime Minister.
Enchanté.
Delighted to meet you. You will be going to Europe in the coming days. Do you also expect to go to the United States and meet with Mr. Trump before calling an election? Well, I received an invitation from the President of France to have a conversation on a number of issues, trade issues in particular, issues with respect to the security of Europe, Ukraine, and Canada. And I also received an invitation from the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. So I think it's a good idea to go there now because we must diversify our trade partners and strengthen our security in so doing. I hope I will have a conversation with President Trump, but I don't have a plan at this point to do that.
I received the questions on a trip to Paris and London in a few days. I received an invitation from the President of France to discuss a variety of issues, both economic, commercial, to reinforce those relationships, also issues related to security in Europe, in Canada. Similar discussions will be had with the Prime Minister in the United Kingdom. This is sensible. Security is a priority for this government, reinforcing our security, as is diversifying our trading and commercial relationships, of course, with both Europe and the United Kingdom. There are many opportunities. And as I said a moment ago in my remarks, there are historic ties. With respect to the President, I don't have plans to go to the United States. I look forward to speaking to him at the appropriate moment. Thank you.
Monsieur Carney, il y a Monsieur Rubio,
Mr. Carney,
Marco Rubio,
Mr. Rubio, this morning in Charlevoix, basically repeat what Donald Trump has been saying, according to whom, economically speaking, Canada would be better as the 51st state of the United States. Now, as Prime Minister of Canada, what do you respond to the comments made by the Secretary of State on Canadian soil? It's crazy. It's crazy. It's very simple.
Point final.
That's all you can say.
It's crazy. His point is crazy. That's it.
Question.
Yeah.
Hi, Prime Minister Tom Perry with CBC. Can I ask you what your plans are for the next few weeks? Are you going to be bringing back the House? Are you going to be calling an early election? And if so, when should Canadians expect to go to the polls?
Well, they certainly should expect to go to the polls before November. The news today is behind me. An exceptional group of individuals who are serving Canada, united, focused cabinet, focused on action, focused on the issues for Canadians. We're, as I said a moment ago, we will be going to take some decisions which directly meet some of the objectives I set out in my remarks and we've been discussing. That's the news for today. There will be other news in the coming days with respect to ensuring that we have as strong a mandate that is needed for the time. Thank you.
And when you're in Europe, are you going to be seeking assurances from Canada's allies that this country will never become America's 51st state? And when would it be an appropriate time for you to take that message to the U.S. president?
Well, I've been clear. Personally, I've been clear. The ministers behind me, I think, to an individual, when asked, have been clear that we will never, ever, in any way, shape, or form, be part of the United States. America is not Canada. Look at the ceremony we just had. You could not have had that ceremony. You would not have that ceremony in America. Look at the cabinet behind me. You would not have that cabinet in America. You do not have that cabinet in America. We are a very fundamentally different country. So irrespective of any issues economically, fundamentally to our core, to our identity, is one reason why we have a minister, and I will thank Monsieur Guilbeault to be our Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture and bringing in all those aspects and reinforcing them. So before we get to the economics of it, we won't be part of it. And when we get to the economics, and the president is a successful business person and deal maker, we're his largest client in so many industries. As the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Industry, Monsieur Leblanc and Monsieur Champagne have made this point. And clients expect respect and working together in a proper commercial way. So the nature of Canada means we won't. The economics means we shouldn't. And what you will see from this government is focusing on building here at home, building with different partners abroad, and that will reinforce the point. It's good. We're doing it for our own reasons, to be clear, for our own people, for the high-paying jobs. But eventually, the truth will out, and the Americans will understand as well. Thank you.
Our allies, sir, do you want to?
I don't think we need. I don't think we need to hear it from. Nous sommes maîtres. We're masters in our home. We're in charge. You know, we're in charge. It's always nice when people say nice things about you, but we don't need it. We're not seeking it. What the discussions I will have on behalf of the government in Paris and in London will relate to opportunities that both our countries share, as well as our shared history.
Monsieur le Premier ministre, Valérie Gamache de Radio-Canada.
Radio-Canada, delighted to meet you.
Vous n'avez pas de ministre qui
You
vient de
don't
l'Alberta.
have any minister from Alberta or a riding in Alberta. Is that because you yourself are thinking of running in an Albertan riding?
vous avez raison que
Well, you're
j'ai
right.
grandi
I
en
did grow up
et
in Alberta.
J'ai lancé ma
And I
campagne
launched
à Edmonton, ça,
my
c'est sûr.
campaign
C'est
in
pas le moment
Edmonton.
d'annoncer,
But today is not the time to
ma
announce the riding where I will run.
Prochaine question. It's a
Next question.
I'm complimenting the journalist from Radio-Canada, and I would like to compliment the very existence of Radio-Canada, and I'd like to reinforce that my government would be reinforcing. It goes back to Canadian identity, culture. This is away from the news, but the broader sense. So I'll finish the answer. I compliment the question. She's recognizing that I grew up in Alberta. I launched my campaign in Alberta. I'm just reinforcing today. Today, the story is behind me, and there will be more news because those behind me will be taking some important decisions this afternoon.
Monsieur Carney, depuis le début de votre point de presse, vous avez 3 fois mentionné les langues officielles.
You 3 times mentioned official languages, and yet that term does not figure in Mr. Guilbeault's mandate. You replace that with Canadian identity. Is there a message there to Quebec? No, not at all. It's all about strengthening our Canadian identity. The language is at the center of our identity, and Mr. Guilbeault is an exceptional minister. And now he has the responsibility, or he still has the responsibility for official languages. But the question of Canadian identity is much broader than just official languages. It's much more than our heritage. We are building Canadian identity, and this is really key. Canadian identity includes nature, and one of Mr. Guilbeault's responsibilities is to bring together all our responsibilities related to nature, oceans, biodiversity, and to ensure those things are protected and promoted.
Prime Minister Carney, first off, congratulations.
Thank you.
Second, David Baxter, Canadian Press. April 1st is fast approaching, the date the consumer carbon tax is set to increase once again. You've talked about getting rid of it. How are you going to do it in the next 2 weeks?
Your question, how are we going to do it by the end of the day? That's a great question, and we'll come right back to you on that following the cabinet meeting.
In that order?
That's you have a better follow-up than that.
Oh, there is a better follow-up, but just to get clarification, you are going to do it by
then that would be
cabinet
3
order?
questions, and everyone else will get angry.
There we go. We'll go back to it. So you've talked about Trump needing to show Canada respect.
President Trump.
President
yes.
Trump, yes. President Trump needing to show Canada respect. You said that again just now. Are you not going to speak with President Trump until he cuts out this 51st state talk?
No. I look forward to speaking with President Trump. Just to be clear, we respect the United States. We respect President Trump. President Trump has put some very important issues at the top of his agenda. We understand his agenda. We understand the importance of addressing the scourge of fentanyl, which is a challenge here in Canada as well as the United States. And I would say that the measures that have been put in place in recent weeks in Canada and Mexico, also the United States, means that we are making tremendous progress. I'll speak specifically for Canada against fentanyl. We understand the importance President Trump places on American workers and American jobs. We want him and his administration to understand the importance we put on Canadian workers and Canadian jobs. And we will look for avenues to work together so that both objectives are met in terms of both our great economies, just as we are doing, and the people behind me have led this, just as we are doing with respect to the scourge of fentanyl. Thank you.
Prochaine question. Next one.
Hi, Prime Minister Carney. I'm Jillian Piper with Global News. I understand that your assets have been put into a blind trust. I wanted to ask you, what is the value of the assets and where did they come from? How can Canadians know that there's no conflict of interest if they don't know where the assets come from?
That's an odd question, or odd way of framing it. The assets are in a blind trust. So, and can I point out that for those who don't follow this, I have 6 months to put, or 120 days to put the assets in a blind trust. I already have put the assets in a blind trust. And once assets are in a blind trust, you don't know that. By definition, you don't know the assets because the trustees take over the responsibility. I would like to reassure you that the assets that I have were earned through employment. Employment income, employment as a public servant, and employment in the private sector. And I would note as well that employment in the private sector is something that the leader of the opposition has never experienced. And I would point as well that complying or meeting standards expected of a leader of a party, let alone a prime minister, is something that the leader of opposition has not respected either, and I'm speaking directly with respect to his refusal, still at a time of great crisis, to get his security clearance, something I managed to do in 2 weeks. En ce qui concerne mes actifs,
with respect to my assets, I had jobs in the public and private sectors, and my assets are now in a blind trust. So I don't know what exactly is in there. That's the whole point. I placed all my assets in a blind trust before I became Prime Minister. I have 120 days to do so normally, but the leader of the opposition is absolutely refusing, and probably he's capable, but he's refusing to receive a security clearance 3 years later, still refusing, and that's unacceptable in my opinion.
Minister, you keep pointing at the group behind you, your new cabinet. There's only 2 representatives from the West. What's your message to Western Canada?
So the numbers in the cabinet are all necessarily smaller because the cabinet is much smaller. And the cabinet is much smaller because it's focused on the issues that are most important to Canadians, meeting the moment, and the moment is a moment of crisis. We have very capable, exceptional members from Western Canada in there, as well as deputies from the West. But it's a factor when you reduce things down. And I'm Prime Minister of all of Canada, of course, and I'm from the West. And I would note maybe as well, and this is a challenge I think we have. I'll just make a general point. Let's take an example of Chrystia Freeland. Okay, exceptional minister, exceptional public service. Chrystia Freeland lives in Toronto. Chrystia Freeland is from the West. Chrystia Freeland is from Alberta. But people get classified in a way that limits the breadth of experience. I could give you many examples of the pan-Canadian nature of this cabinet.
Last question and follow-up. Dernière question et question suivie.
Ramsey with the Toronto Star. Prime Minister, speaking of your cabinet, the front line of your cabinet and the vast majority of your cabinet were all ministers during Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's time. How does this represent change?
Well, there's a couple of things. One is this first thing, smaller cabinet, more focused on action. Everybody in this cabinet is senior. Everybody in this cabinet is senior, so I don't accept the front line and the implication that there's a front line and another line. The second thing is one of the top issues, of course, is the crisis with respect to the United States and the opportunity with respect to trade diversification. So keeping together those individuals who have been on, and now I'm going to use your term, the front line, but the front line in a commercial battle, keeping together those individuals so that we are seamlessly addressing these issues and seizing the opportunities was very important to us, and that's reflected in the cabinet. But of course, it's reflected fundamentally in their capabilities, which are here for the moment.
And on President Trump, what makes you think you personally would be better fit to handle him than Trudeau was, and why do you think he'll have more respect for you than he did for him?
Look, I'm not going to put myself into to represent that President Trump in any way, shape, or form. President Trump and I, though, we share some experiences. I have been in the private sector. I have worked in the real estate sector. I have done large transactions. I have worked with him during his first presidency at the G20, at the G7. I respect what he is looking to accomplish, and we have built a base through the interactions that we've had, including as of yesterday with the meetings of the Minister of Finance, well, I'll say, because their roles have slightly changed, Monsieur Champagne and Monsieur Leblanc, and Premier Ford with the Secretary of Commerce, as well as the meetings that the Minister of Foreign Affairs had with her G7 counterparts, including Secretary Rubio. So we are building that base. But in many respects, part of my experience overlaps with that of the President. We'll both be looking out for our countries. But he knows, and I know from long experience, that we can find mutual solutions that win for both.
Thank you.
Ça, c'est en ce qui concerne M. Trump.
On Mr. Trump?
Alors, lui et moi, nous
well, he and I
des expériences similaires
have similar experience in the private sector. For example, investments in the real estate sector. I know him and I worked with him when he was President of the United States during his first mandate, looking at doing things in the financial sector at the level of the G20. And Canada has made progress in the discussions with the United States through the efforts of Ministers Champagne and Leblanc. There is already a foundation there that has been established, and we'll be able to find solutions based on that.
Right, and that is the first press conference by Prime Minister Carney in his new role as the Prime Minister of this country, with his cabinet behind him, the first Prime Minister to ever be born in a territory in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, taking questions there about how things are going to proceed. Right now, they are headed to their first cabinet meeting where when Mark Carney was asked about getting rid of the carbon tax, he said, wait to see by the end of the day, not by the end of the week. So the first move that he will make, undoubtedly around the cabinet table, doesn't need to be done through legislation. There's a way to do it in other ways. Talked a lot about Donald Trump, obviously, and how Canada is in charge of itself. We are not seeking people to stand up for us, and we don't need it, he said, in relation to his trip to Europe. He also said he looks forward to speaking to Donald Trump and that he respects the president and the United States and understands his agenda. I'll bring in David Cochrane here as we wrap up our coverage of this historic day in Canada. What did you make of Mr. Carney?
Well,
Prime Minister Carney.
Yeah, it seems fairly clear that carbon tax Carney, as the Conservatives like to call him, is going to be the carbon tax killer by the end of the day. Not on the industrial side, but certainly on the on the consumer-facing side. The branding I thought was interesting there, and if Canada's new government sounds familiar, it's because they said it a bunch of times, but also that was the branding that the Stephen Harper government used in 2006 when they formed government. Fred will remember that. That Canada's new government, and this is how they're trying to present this.
Yeah, he said new many times, for
sure.
Yeah.
Laid out sort of like we're going to be faster, more focused, more action-oriented. You know, the criticism the Trudeau government moved a bit too slow, outlining what they say will be their priorities: workers and families, growth, more money in your pockets, homes, conventional and clean energy trade, and one internal economy. And then the contrast, right, against Pierre Poilievre. Negativity isn't strength. It won't accomplish anything. It won't win a trade war. So we're new, here's our priorities, and here's why the other guys are bad. I'm going to kill the carbon tax by the end of the day, and then it's off to Europe next week to talk to people saying, we're going to meet with them about trade, we're going to meet with them about security, but we're not going to ask them to make big statements about our sovereignty because we're in charge, we don't need it, and who knows where things are going to go with the United States.
Was also asked a question about his wealth, frankly. He has placed all his assets in a blind trust before he was supposed to do that proactively. That is all the law requires, but as you've probably heard, Pierre Poilievre has asked for more, though Prime Minister Carney points out these are assets earned through income, both private and public sector. Experience, he said, that Pierre Poilievre does not have in the private sector. So taking a couple of stabs at the opposition leader as we wait for him to talk at the top of the clock as well.
And again, the Conservative leader not having a security clearance And Prime Minister Carney said that he did the process and it took him 2 weeks. And as somebody who watched the previous Liberal administration take punch after punch after punch and not counter, a lot of Liberals are looking for this, to get up off the mat and to push back. The Conservatives ran on a carbon tax when they ran in 2021. 119 MPs, Conservative MPs, ran on that. They've changed their mind on that. And I think they also have to remind that both parties that ran in 2021, that came first and second, had this. I do think that the Conservatives are hoping a little too much around carbon pricing, carbon tax trying to be the issue. But as Fred pointed out, as people get to know someone, their negatives can rise. Poilievre's negatives are quite high. There are relentless advertising. They seem a little silly. A lot of names, sneaky and carbon tax. But, you know, the Carney campaign a couple of weeks ago had raised at least $4 million. I'm told it's beyond that. I'm not sure that they needed everything in a short leadership campaign. So it's time to start pushing back and learn the lesson of Dion and Ignatieff. Do not let others define you before you define yourself.
Fred?
Watching it, it was interesting. It kind of a throwback to the debate where he does not seem to like taking questions, and he does not seem very polished at doing so.
A little prickly sometimes.
Very prickly. But also his way of, it feels like he is trying to get cute with things and avoid actually answering. The Brookfield was the first thing that jumped out at the debate when he basically misled us. He said he wasn't involved. He was involved. He did push this through. And it was something he could have told a story about it. He could have done something, but he did that. And this about his assets today, asked about that, saying, oh, it's on a blind trust. Now, the question was worded poorly. But I think Canadians would like to know, what were the assets? Where were they? What's out there? And it's something that I think he's going to be asked a lot about this.
But they do eventually become public.
Yeah, and
a summary of the
after
assets.
the election.
They make fun reading.
But again, he's going to be asked about this. If he's going to keep trying to duck and dodge, I think it's going to be a problem.
Depending on how quickly the ethics commissioner does their work, it could be before the election, it could be during the election. In fact, you could get an assets drop during the election.
But it's also
it's up to
fairly
the
general, though.
Yeah, it's a summary of assets.
Yeah. Mel.
I want to pick up on the point that Fred made about story. Obviously, the things that Mark Carney was trying to say here was, here's what our government's going to do differently. Very much steady hand, very much we're going to tackle the economy. I don't think he was telling a story to people outside of that. If I'm listening to that as a regular family at home, thinking how is he going to make my life better outside of obviously this massive threat that we have coming from Donald Trump, I don't know what he was saying to me. I don't know how he's going to make my life better tomorrow, in a few weeks, in a few months. We go back and forth on, does it matter right now? Perhaps not, but to me it would, right? So I'm trying to see how does that spell out in the next few weeks as we go into the campaign? Will he just focus there? Is he going to see any change of conversation in the telling a story, telling how he's going to show up for people outside of how he's going to handle Donald Trump? I think that'll be interesting because I don't think we heard that today.
His comments around Donald Trump, though, explaining why he was going to Europe, first of all, because he got invitations. He didn't get one to the White House. Secondly, saying that he is not going there seeking for someone to say, we stand up for Canada. We don't need it. We are sovereign and strong in our own right. That's powerful for a Canadian right now, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see whether at some point we would like some allies to say some things in our favor a bit stronger. There has been some criticism of the UK Prime Minister in particular for not being a bit stronger. I think his comments on Trump are as much reflective of how much the time has changed. I feel like, between when Justin Trudeau went down to Mar-a-Lago last fall and now, there was sort of a shift where the idea of a sort of charm offensive, go down there, talk to them, try to reason with them, I think we passed the point where that approach has sort of expired. I think the 100th time that he made a 51st state joke, it stopped being funny. So the mood has changed. I think from Carney today, I think, obviously he's trying to send a message that he's different from Justin Trudeau. I think you have to just listen to him for 30 seconds to realize we no longer have Prime Minister Trudeau around.
That's right.
We'll see how that is sort of negotiated going forward in terms of policy, in terms of how he can account for where the country is now. I think the second half of that message, though, is that he's not Pierre Poilievre. And, you heard that in the comments that David mentioned about negativity, about private sector experience, about sort of maturity, I think was kind of the underlying point there on the security clearance. But I think the sort of flip side of that is that we're at a point where the Conservative leader and the Liberal leader, the Prime Minister, are talking about the same set of issues in terms of the strength of the economy, in terms of affordability, in terms of dealing with Donald Trump. And now we're at the point where hopefully everybody lays their cards on the table and we see what the actual plans are for this. Yeah. All this talk about cutting the carbon tax, for instance, fine. It's going to be dead by the end of today. What's the actual plan now from both sides for climate change? Yeah. What's the actual plan for cutting emissions? That's where the discussion needs to move now.
Though, as my colleague Chantal Hébert says frequently on that issue, this may end up just being a plebiscite on who can take on Donald Trump and little else. And so while those things may be important, for sure, a lot of what he said was really pushing in that direction. Even, I thought, David, the stuff around explaining what Stephen Guilbeault's job is in terms of defending Canada's identity, whether that be official languages, which is where that lives now, or whether it be our way of life. That's pretty interesting positioning when you're trying to talk about how you would take on Donald Trump.
Yeah, he's positioning himself as a very CEO style Prime Minister, right? Yeah. And it's not going to Justin Trudeau is very much the brand. I don't think you're going to necessarily see that so much with Mark Carney. And I think you can kind of, if you look at what I think he's trying to do, in terms of the bottom line for this election is resume versus rhetoric. What I've done, what I'm capable of, versus the other guy we're going to hear at 2:00, from Pierre Poilievre, who he says is just nothing but negativity and no solutions. And I know, he looked a little bit prickly there, taking some of the questions. Just wait till the 2 p.m. press conference, and we'll see how that goes, right? If there are questions and pushback and follow-up allowed. I do think all the other issues that we talk about, it really is, I think, just going to be, we're in the middle of a solar eclipse, and Donald Trump is blotting out everything. And this is very much where the election is going. He laid out, we're going to focus on these 4 or 5 things. It's not everything.
No.
It's 4 or 5 things, just like Pierre Poilievre does. Yeah. It's a smaller cabinet with a narrower agenda and a simple pitch. I'm the guy. So we'll see if that's where it goes.
Yeah, and I guess then the only thing you can try and do as a Conservative is to undermine his credibility, right? And get people to doubt whether you want to believe him.
Right, and that's, I think, what they're trying to do with their ads and what they're pushing out, their messaging. They are spending, I assume they're going to spend whatever they have in the bank until the writ is dropped. Because then once that happens, everyone's equal.
Yeah, it's all contained. Okay. Thank you all. Greg McEachern, Fred Delory, Melanie Richer. You guys will be back with the host of Power and Politics.
Right
who's
here.
Also here. Just the same table, same studio. Thank you all for being here. Aaron Wary, thank you for joining us. And of course, thanks to my my sidecar. I don't know, I'm
like the Chewbacca to your Han Solo, I think. Whenever you're piloting, I'm right there.
Ditto. Thanks very much to David Cochran. You can watch him on Power and Politics later. I'll be back on The National with a special edition of At Issue. I'm Rosemary Barton. Thank you so much for watching our special coverage of the swearing in of Mark Carney, the 24th Prime Minister of Canada. Politics is unfolding fast and furious in this country. Stay tuned to CBC News Network for all the developments with us. We will be with you through an election that is likely coming very soon. Thank you so much for watching. Take good care.